All right, welcome to the Imperial 80s. It is good to be with you. Please take a minute, like, share, subscribe. We are doing this on a normal off day for us. Usually we do it on Monday, but we had to get Dwayne Monroe with us to do this episode on Blade Runner. We asked Dwayne probably in the fall, like what movie
Mhm.
he would want to do. And I think I pitched The Wrath of Khan to you first, and you were like, no, it's got to be Blade Runner. So, uh, Dwayne, it's great to be with you again. Hope you are doing
Mhm.
well. I know it was quite hot out in Europe last time we spoke, and now
Yes.
it is quite hot here on the East Coast of the United States. So, yeah.
Yeah, good to be here. Thank you for inviting me, and we can do the Rathacon at some point in the future. I'm not against that, although I will say that as I have matured, my read of that film has changed dramatically.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
yeah. There's a lot. Yeah. That's a very Orientalist film, I feel like, for sure.
I mean, even the original episode is even worse than the Orientalism. The original, like
Yeah,
that
yeah,
con comes
yeah,
from. I mean,
yeah.
I don't want to say they cleaned it up; they just lightened the load a bit.
It's a good way of putting it. It's a good way of putting it.
Wow. I'm not a Trekkie to the degree to know the original episode, so
I mean, I
It's
like the
deep.
original episode because because of there's some great moments in it, as there always were in the original Trek, and the cinematography for a television show is just really outstanding. But yeah, it's got lots of problems.
Yeah, just would you Google Ricardo Montalban con Star Trek and you'll just see it. TV
Oh, and
show.
not to take us off track too much, but then of course Hollywood, like I don't know, double, triple, quadruple down by putting, wait for it, audience, Benedict motherfucking Cumberbatch in the role in the film.
Yes.
Benedict Cumberbatch. Like, let's you know what? We have like a guy who's quote unquote ethnic, so maybe he's con. No, 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 no. Let's make a guy who's so white that if you put him in a mayonnaise jar, you would miss him.
Is that the hold my
Lost in the
beer?
snowstorm.
It's the hold my beer for what's his name in Batman as Ra's al Ghul, right? When they made Liam
that Liam
Neeson
Neeson.
Ra's
Yeah.
al
It's
Ghul.
like, oh my god, oh my god.
That's we're just gonna make them white people. We know this has
That's
been
it.
bad.
That's it. Let's just accept it. I expect that the film version of Xi Jinping's life will be played by, I don't know, Brad Pitt. Anyway,
That's hilarious. All right, so let's start with memories of this whenever that started for us. M2, do you want to go first?
I could start, yeah. So I distinctively remember it when I was a kid because it was this movie that Harrison Ford was in that I was too young to understand. And he wouldn't have been Harrison Ford, he would have been Han Solo at the time, right? Though probably by like the late 80s, I had or Indiana Jones. I had like a recollection, a kind of understanding of who Harrison Ford was as an actor. He was very big for me. But it was this movie that was seemingly weirdly unapproachable. Like I was like, I'm not gonna like 8 or 9. I'm not gonna take that off the video store shelf. And neither of my parents would be interested in this. My mother and my father are not sci-fi people. When I became a teenager and I started like getting into movies, this was a movie that would consistently come up as something to see. And one of the interesting things is it's actually one of the very first DVDs. Many people I don't think know that. It's one of the early DVDs. Someone in high school I knew had gotten a copy of it when DVDs first started like becoming a thing. And he would play it in his house. And I don't know if I saw the first time I'm seeing the film, I'm seeing it in like pieces. So I'm seeing like, maybe like the Sean Young sequence when we first see her at Terrell and all these kind of things. the thing that it also connected was I was a big Total Recall fan, which I actually have a Total Recall t-shirt right here, the Copenhagen Air, right? I love that shirt. And then someone told me, well, that's Philip K. Dick who wrote that. He also wrote Blade Runner. And that's like the first. I was like, oh, interesting. And it was kind of my first kind of introduction to Philip K. Dick, which we'll talk about, of course, in this. So I think maybe I was about 16 when I first watched it, and I grabbed it, and I was in. I was into it in the sense that I had saw something that I had never seen before. Like I thought it was, really intriguing, dark. I can't say that I took anything from it in the initial watch. I was more into things like Akira, other kinds of sci-fi stuff. I think had a lot more resonance with me. This didn't really resonate with me in the way, but it had a presence. And like I think I told myself, well, this is a great piece of cinema. You'll reckon or wrestle with it at some point in your development. College comes around, kind of same thing. I kept watching it, and I never really kind of grabbed onto it. And I will talk about that, I think, what I realized why a little bit later. Well, there's two reasons. One, I'll say immediately. When I got out of college, I was given a copy of Philip K. Dick's The Three Stigmatas of Palmer Eldritch by a friend. And he says, have you ever read any Philip K. Dick? And I said, no, I actually haven't. He's like, read this. And that book blew my mind. I was absolutely like, this is one of the greatest things I've ever read in my life. I immediately became like this huge interest in his work. I think I read Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep next. I think so. I grabbed that and I fell in love with that book. I was absolutely taken by it. I remember I read it. I was working a job at a school. I was in a really terrible emotional moment. I had a breakup that was really horrible. And the book, if you have read Philip K. Dick, I mean, he makes you very paranoid. So if you have any kind of emotional line that's a little bit funky, it'll it'll grab you through. I remember being on a train and there's the scene with the Russian when you don't know he's a replicant and he comes in and he fights them in the car. I was like, oh, I'm in the train, looking at, are they replicants? I was really losing it. So
Philip
I
K.
tried.
Dick is the writer. Philip K. Dick. Imagine that Kafka lived to witness atomic weapons.
Boom.
That's Philip K.
Dick. That's a good one. That's a good one. So circling back, I tried to watch Blade Runner again. And this is when I'm really getting into cinema. And I had a connect and a disconnect with it that I think has always existed. The connect is in some of the intrigue around the cinematic tools that have been made to use it. The cinematography, the light. I'm not as big a special effects person, to be honest with you. It doesn't really, I have a lot of respect, especially for the classic people with special effects, but it's never really driven me in terms of my interest with cinema. But the framing, the use of space, the three levels, deep space, I thought was really always very interesting. I'll talk about this more as I'm curious at Jay's and Dwayne's. I began to realize some of my disconnect with the story were particular interests around Blade Runner from particular people that I knew that kind of fell in interesting political lines. There's a film nerd love for this that I've always experienced. And it often comes from, and this might be I know I'm probably going to start putting people in boxes, but I'm not saying everyone who loves this movie is this. I'm just saying there's kind of a particular kind of people that I've encountered. There is a certain individual, very nihilistic, a very attached to a kind of my creator, if I was a creator, questions that I don't really have. Partly because maybe because I'm an atheist. I don't have those kinds of questions and things like that. And I also find for people, especially a lot of film nerds who love the world of movies, but don't love humanity. And they want a kind of permission to not love humanity and to love things that are kind of outside of humanity that can have human characteristics, I have found I would be in consistent argument with these people over this film because I've had many an argument. There's people, if you get into like real film kind of nerdy thing, there's people who think this is the greatest movie ever made. You do have camps, or it's one of the five. You have to reckon with it. I don't. I've never even come close to that. I've had bar arguments. I'm like, I mean, it's happened, and I don't. And like I'm just like, look, man, you know. So it's existed. My students love it. A lot of them, some of them. Well, no, let me not say that. I have students who quite like it. Comes up a lot. I have students who quite like it. I have students who don't like it. Most of them tend to be women. Do not like Blade Runner. Some don't. I'm not saying, and there's women that I know who do love Blade Runner, right? But I know some of them tend to be people who aren't white. There's like it's like interesting. I've had a lot of conversations. The Orientalism, which we'll definitely get into within it. I know there's a lot of scholarship on that, you know, the Orientalism of the picture. And I know a lot of people have done great work on that. So it's a film that constantly comes up in film studies. So yeah, Blade Runner is like kind of like always in my life as a person who teaches film. It's just always there. And I feel like I'm constantly, you know, just manning the different stuff around it. I'll stop there.
You go next, Dwayne, because mine will be less interesting, probably.
I first saw Blade Runner several years after it was released when I was old enough to go to the theater with my boys. And as you know, sci-fi film enthusiasts, we would go as a group to see new releases, whatever they happened to be. Well, there were some films that were like, no, we're not going to see that. It's too terrible, too corny. But Blade Runner definitely was on the list, and it was on the list because the television ads that we saw when we were younger and we weren't quite old enough to go see it, they were intriguing, right? And I had a recollection of these ads by the time I was able to actually, get out with my friends and go. Well, on the day that we had scheduled to go, all my boys, dropped out. I think some had dates, some had other things to do. I'm like, all right, I'll go by myself. And it was a rainy, very, very rainy day in a theater in downtown Philadelphia. And all of the towers, the skyscrapers of downtown were obscured by the mist of rain. Now, this is obviously a perfect mood setter for going to see Blade Runner. And I didn't know what to expect, really. And I will tell you that my first impression, as a young person, was a bit of astonishment. Astonishment because it was clearly set in the future, but the first sequence is what? It is the spinner flying through a field that has gas flares in it, right? Petroleum gas flares. And this is like a little detail that film that a lot of people miss, I think, because Los Angeles is known for many things. Hollywood, the Kardashians, whatever. It is not known for being a center of hydrocarbon production, right? Which to this day it is to some extent. And so the thought hit my head, my God, it's the future, but they're still using oil. And they're using oil to such an extent that the world is wrecked, right? And this astonished me because, as a Star Trek kid and so forth, my thought was, well, when you reach the future, you have more advanced technologies, a better world, and so forth. And so the fact that this world was completely wrecked, almost completely wrecked, that was the first thing that astonished me. Now, of course, the world building, as people say, was also quite impressive. I mean, they had created a hermetically sealed world. Like you could look at any part of that screen and you could not see like a Toyota Tercel or something like that, or someone doing something that did not belong in that world. That was quite impressive just from a filmmaking perspective. And then there was the fact that at that time I was beginning to fall in love with film noir. And so it was very obviously an homage or a borrowing, you could say. Now it lacked what the best noirs, such as Out of the Past from 1947 and other like truly great films, um, or Kiss of Death, it lacked what those films had, which is a kind of understanding of the structure of capitalism, whether it's explicit or implicit. But one of the aspects of noir that people don't get is that it is an indictment of capitalism. Um, um, Blade Runner was a world that was, as I said, in a state of severe decay, with people fleeing, those who had the means, fleeing off the planet. But there was no, as I got older, I understood this. I began to perceive this. Yeah, but why? Why is it like this? What has brought the world to this very, very sorry state? What has reduced Los Angeles, once the, in the US crown, once a glittering joy, at least in perception, you know, um, pretty people and film and beaches, what has reduced it to a garrison town, essentially, on a dying planet? What happened? And then, of course, these replicants, the escaped synthetic people, were obviously slaves, right? I mean, this is what they were. They were used for either military purposes or sexual purposes, what have you. Obviously, slaves. And so, what brought that about? Now, I had read Philip K. Dick's novel, which I recommend people do because it is indeed a very fine piece of literature, and Dick does provide explanations for why the world is in this state. In his story, "Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep?" The world is in its state because of the obvious nuclear catastrophe, right? And there are no-go zones because of radiation. One of the other things that, as I got older, sort of impressed me about this film was that they had updated even at that point. And I think that James Hansen, a NASA scientist, had given his testimony in 1981, I believe it was, before Congress about climate change. So I don't know, and Tume, perhaps you know how this change was made in the script from a nuclear war to ecological decay. But as I got older, it impressed me that, yeah, they shifted it from an atomic war being the cause of the collapse to what we're actually witnessing now. Although we're in the unenviable position of facing ecological collapse and the potential for an atomic war, which is kind of a two for Tuesday of catastrophes, as it were. But those are my initial impressions of the film. Was that it was the first film I had seen, other than like films I saw like on was it UHF we used to call it, from like the 1950s films from before my time. But I love these films. They were always like atomic mutants. Everyone's living underground. That was the depiction of a collapsed world. But the collapse, as in Dick's novel, was caused by a war. This was the first time I had seen the future and all the things that we associated with this future: flying cars, thinking machines, all these things that we thought of as being cool aspects of the future, placed not in a Star Trek world, but in a completely collapsed and clearly dying world. That was new to me, and it left a very powerful impression. But I understand what you mean about the nihilism, to me, of people who think that, oh yeah, this is cool. No, it's not. It's a
I want to
horrible,
live in
horrible
2019
outcome.
of Blade Runner.
Yeah, right. I don't know what kind of weirdo you are, dude.
Yeah,
But I'd want to run screaming from that world.
for sure. So my experience, I think I've been somewhat similar or tangential, at least, to both of yours. I definitely was aware of the film, but also, because it came out 82, like I definitely didn't see it when it came out. Um, and, also Harrison Ford was an actor that I was a fan of. I certainly, always liked Han Solo, Witness. Um, you know, I was a big Last Crusades fan, which we have to do that at some point also. Um,
Wait,
um,
is that the one where he? That's not the one where he escaped a thermonuclear blast by hiding in a refrigerator, is it?
I think that's later.
Oh, that's later. That's
Yeah.
later. Okay.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
later.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Okay.
yeah, yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
All right.
No, yeah, it's the one with Sean Connery, actually, and the one where the drinking of the cup, of
The
Christ
Holy
and all this kind
Grail.
of yeah, the Holy Grail,
That's
yeah.
right. That's right. That's
Um,
right.
and of course Nazis, right? And so, but I saw this movie, I think probably in my early teens. It was something again that would have been like on HBO or whatever else. And, over again, there's a lot of movies we've talked about on this series, hanging out with friends, playing video games, and it being on. And I mean, this is one of the things that I think for me, I did my most serious watches of this film in preparation for this episode because it has often been a film. I've never seen it in the theaters, which I think definitely takes away from what the experience of that would be, because I do think visually and in terms of sound, it's a really impressive film on a number of levels. Um, and I want to give it like, I know we'll have some discussion about that. And Tume may have some like critiques and all of that, but I do think that for me, this is kind of what I love about 80s filmmaking. It's similar to like the Star Wars franchise and so on, is these practical effects, the miniaturization of stuff, filming that out rather than the fucking CGI garbage that we get starting in the 90s that has just ruined sci-fi particularly. I think it has done horrors too. Um, but also stuff like Marvel and all that kind of thing. So you are like immersed in a world, but I will say that I never watching it, even over the years, even after I became interested in Philip K. Dick, which I'll bring to in a second. Um, I never got that into the story of it or like what it was supposed to mean. It didn't, that part of it just didn't really catch me because it's kind of so sparse, and there are really only a few themes, and I know we'll talk about them. They're interesting themes, but they're not really explored in much depth in the movie. I think the book is a much different story in that regard. Um, so so I would just say that for me, like my general take on this was always that it was visually quite cool to me. I liked the world. Not that I wanted to live in the world. I just thought the world making exercise was very well done, right? Um and I think that's an important distinction because people who want to live in the world, that's a little bit of a concern. To that point, though, like probably where I got most interested in, and when I went and read the book initially, and got into kind of a Philip K. Dick phase, read a few of his things, was related to hip hop specifically, and so it was LP, right? It was Cannibal Ox's Cold Vein. It was Deltron 3030. It was those albums which all have specific references to this book and the movie itself, right? Um, and I was a fan of Def Jux in particular in the late, well, really, I guess early 2000s because there's Raucous in the late 90s and so on and so forth. Um, and but that's interesting as well because that comes about post 9/11, and there's a kind of like paranoia post-apocalyptic vibe within all of those albums that yeah was interesting to me. I mean, especially in the Patriot Act and the war on terror that followed, right? Seeing these visions of kind of surveillance, authoritarianism, imperialism, kind of really vamp up from where they were in the 90s, where you had a little bit of a lull. Not, I mean, not for everybody, of course, not in Cuba, Haiti, Yugoslavia, etc. Right, but it was not to the degree that you had like during the Cold War in terms of that kind of big clash of superpowers that you saw, and not what you saw post 9/11, where you got very paranoid, very a big push towards surveillance. And I think that push towards surveillance is largely what drew the interest of people like LP and Del the Funky Homo Sapien and others into that, of like critiquing that, right? Seeing kind of like, you know, and look, I do have a lot of issues with, you know, how ubiquitous surveillance has become, but that's not necessarily a politics in itself, right? And I think that that is where um, I probably agree with some of what Mtume feels about people who like really love this movie in particular and are like really into, I wouldn't even say Philip K. Dick, but the film adaptations of Philip K. Dick's work, because I think Philip K. Dick's work in itself is much more interesting. I do think that, and we'll come to this maybe as we talk about some of the themes in the movie. I do think his interest in Nazism in particular is quite interesting, but it also kind of dovetails with like, I want to give him a little more credit than Hannah Arendt, because I think he's not as anti-communist as she is. Um, he doesn't say the Soviet Union is the same thing. In fact, in Blade Runner, or in Do Androids Dream of Sheep, the Soviet Union is the US ally in trying to kind of, which for good or bad, right? Because I think that there's a little bit of him critiquing both, but the sort of control of the androids, right? Or the war against them in certain ways. But he's very interested in this lack of empathy that he finds within the archives of the Nazis and exploring that. And I think that the book, whatever people think about that theme, which we'll talk about within the film, it's done much more seriously within the book than it is within the movie. And so that's just kind of like some of my journey with this stuff. Um, but yeah, I mean, I think, again, just to quickly summarize, I was always found it visually interesting, but not necessarily holding my attention, because the narrative, the story, and so on just didn't really capture me in that kind of way when I watched it. So, and it still doesn't to some degree, even though I,
Yeah,
found it
it's
interesting on the rewatch.
I mean, as a film, it's an exercise in aesthetics and thematics. In but because, as you say, the ideas are intriguing and actually and quite important, really, such as empathy or the lack thereof, ecological collapse, uh, and various other themes that are in the story. I mean, these are all things that are on our minds, or should be. So of course you're going to be, and and it's evergreen. I mean, the film came out. What was it? 81 was it that it came out originally? And when I saw it, by the time I saw it, it was several years later, a number of years later, and it was in a little. It was at Theater of the Living Arts in Philadelphia, where it was shown in a kind of a revival. So I had the chance to see it on the big screen because of that, right? And uh, and so, but it's the and as you say, to me, people who are interested in film and other sorts of people are to this day still talking about this film. So its themes and its presentation of those themes are evergreen and still intriguing because we still wrestle. In fact, our condition, sadly, our condition is approaching in many ways like a Blade Runner type scenario. We will never have thinking machines. Sorry, everyone. No. We will never have space colonies. Sorry, everyone. No. There are limits to what we can do, especially under capitalism, because capitalism is only headed in one direction, which is to hell, and not to actual innovation. But in any event, although we won't have those technological aspects of the film, the some of the other aspects of the film, as I say, are top of mind.
So let's do a little bit of development. Um, we can probably talk about Dick in there as well. Get in there. So like we said, the film comes from an original text by Philip K. Dick called "Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep," written in 1968. Um, Dick has a very interesting career that you could do 10 hours on. So we're not going to do an exhaustive on Philip K. Dick right now. Really interesting career that starts off doing kind of, shorter pieces in different types of early like sci-fi mags. Really, interesting person in that way. Wrote tons of novels, short stories, so forth and so on. There was interest, though the book wasn't like a massive success at all. It wasn't like something that was like massively, read. It did have interest almost immediately from people to be adapted. There's even stories of like Martin Scorsese had read it and had interest in doing it, but he apparently never optioned it. There's a lot of different people who kind of would look to possibly get involved. I think a lot of that also has to do, if you think about how much of these kinds of novels were written, were read by people within Hollywood or within the kind of like booming new kind of intelligentsia or interest in like kind of like the new kind of culture. People were reading this kind of stuff. They were getting ideas from it. It was all very interesting to them, right? So a producer named Herb Jaffe, he optioned it in the early 70s. And Herb Jaffe wrote a screenplay of it that Dick hated. He absolutely thought it was terrible. He rejected it immediately. It's funny to read. I read a long interview a while ago. I didn't reread it for this, where like he talks about all of the different kind of versions and like his expletives towards the different versions of the screenplay are just so massive. Like, this is a piece of crap, right? He said, was it Robert flew down to Santa Ana to speak with me about the project. And the first thing I said to him when he got off the plane was, shall I beat you up here at the airport or shall I beat you up back at my apartment? Like, just absolutely.
And the thing about Dick is that those were not empty threats.
No, not at all. I mean, one of the things about Dick is he was a hyper paranoid individual. Suffered from lots of mental health complications. There's a lot to him, right? He struggled with money, issues with family, lots of challenges. And you can really feel a lot of that stuff embedded in his novels. And there probably were certain levels where not even probably, he's even said it in interviews where sometimes that paranoia would take on kind of like delusions of grandeur, right? This person who's looking at me might be a Nazi or communist agent, all types of shit. And it went to those levels. So I could also see him being like, they got my screenplay. It's probably a duplicitous individual trying to do some shit. Like, it was totally there. So then another guy optioned it, Hampton Fancher. And it was in 1977 that he optioned it. And a producer got an interest in it. And they were basically went on a first recording of Ridley Scott to do it, which took some time. Ridley Scott was not interested immediately in doing it. It was not one of the first things he wanted to do, but eventually they did it. A lot of it had to do with Scott was also one of the early people who were supposed to do Dune, which I had found out. So that wasn't happening. So he said, well, let me come on to Blade Runner. We'll get into Ridley Scott in a moment. I think there's definitely some really interesting things with him. So it kind of goes on this journey of like development, which we'll get into some of the more fine points that I think are really, really interesting. But one of the things is Fancher's screenplay, Dick also did not like. He was not into it. He called it terrible, said it was corny. He said he pretty much had pretty just drained what was interesting about it out of it. And they ended up getting another guy called David Peoples to rewrite the script, right? And Fancher left it, right? And Dick was much more agreeable in his kind of feelings towards this script. He said he liked it a lot more, said it really worked. Though I will say something, and I've looked at this before, there's also an element of it that I think Dick was really struggling with money after a certain point.
Yes.
And I think there's a certain degree where he began to kind of go, especially because one of the things that happens is Dick does not live to see the film finished. So all he saw was a 20-minute special effects reel. And I read there's an interview, there's a really famous interview of Dick. I think it's like about a month before he died, maybe 2 months. And he was talking about he was in like serious struggles financially. And like he said that he hoped that this film coming out would help him with his career. So I think there's also a kind of recognition that he kind of had to give up a little bit of the kind of control to kind of let this thing happen. Because, you know, when we can get into the film, and who knows, he might have loved the film, but I do think that there's a way that they write it. Oh, this was going to be the film that Philip K. Dick was like, you don't really know that actually, because he never saw it, right? He never saw it, right? And so that's kind of the Dick end of it, you know, and then it goes to the production. So the production is, like I said, directed by Ridley Scott. Ridley Scott's quite a character. He you know, what to say from him? I mean, I'll keep it. It comes from a very, you know, his father was the owner of a shipping company, or a commercial shipping business,
I did
right?
not know that.
Yeah, colonel. He would serve as a colonel in the Royal Engineers in the Second World War. You know, he comes from capital, which I find his interest, and it actually answers your question. Ridley Scott said that the nuclear war thing did not interest him. He's into this idea, and you see it in Alien as well, of corporate malfeasance. And that corporations will be the thing that are going to kind of destroy the humanity. So I see a little bit of like rich kid. Oh, my father made tons of money and he probably did terrible things and dropped shit in the oceans. Oh, my father, my fortune comes from this. It's the shit that you see from these rich, high class dudes. And it's kind of him wrestling with that because he's obsessed with the whole corporation thing.
Yeah. That's a good catch, because you're right. When I saw Alien, it's like, you don't even get a sense there is like any sort of government. They're just corporations. And when I remember the first time I saw Alien, I'm like, well, okay, but how could that be? Because what's preventing these? Who's protecting their wealth? Like, you need a state, right? Like, what? I mean, also, corporates are a mess. They can't get anything done.
Exactly, 100%. Yeah,
but that's fascinating. Yeah,
yeah,
but the rich kid thing. Yeah,
and then the other thing is, he went to the Royal Academy of Art or whatever like that. Ridley Scott worked in corporate England for a long time as a commercial producer. So he was working with large corporations doing things for Chanel. You know, he was an art director in TV and things like that. You know, Ridley Scott, he has been wedded to big capital for a long time, right? So this is his third film. His first film was like The Duelists, with Keitel and what's his name? Who was the other guy within the movie The Duelists? I forget. And then of course Alien is the film he does after that, and then this is his third. And Alien, of course, Duelist was like a medium success. Go ahead.
Keith Carradine.
Keith Carradine, right? One of the Carradines. The Carradine family, right? Of course, right? I find The Duelist to be an overrated film. People The Duelist, it's his best film, and I watched this shit. I was like, this is liberalism. Fuck this bullshit. Anyway, that Alien, I do like Alien. I ain't gonna lie, I do like Alien. I enjoy Alien quite a lot. But and then you have this, and the other thing about this film is that it's a massive budget. It's a $30 million film in '82. So you adjust that, we're getting close to $100 million in our. And you know, we have to credit Star Wars for this kind of thought. I think what Dwayne said about, you know, or did he say it on here? I remember not that we were talking before, 2001 Space Odyssey. I think, because another thing to think about with this movie is, you know, and I've read this before. One of the things is like this idea of, you know, Star Wars is a big Hollywood film, but can we make, like, you know, the Prestige Star Wars? right?
Mm-hmm.
This idea of the author's cinema, the second cinema, first cinema blend, right? The author's cinema version of Star Wars. And they pitched Blade Runner like that, mainly because the company, if you think of the company who did it, they also did Chariots of Fire the year before, right? They were a company who did some schlock, but they also did like, you know, some of these more prestige-y kind of movies. They did Body Heat, right? You know, with we have to do Body Heat, actually. Body Heat's one of those movies we definitely, Dwayne, that's what a hilarious movie. But they're kind of in this kind of, you know, vibe of, you know, of making things that have a bit more prestige energy to it. And Blade Runner is supposed to kind of be that. So they shelled out a lot of money. I mean, there's a lot of other things in it. Like, I mean, there's so much, and maybe I'll let some other people want to throw some things in, because we have Vangelis, we have the cast. We can throw things in, but I'll stop there if anybody wants to take something, you know, other like production or things that they found intriguing.
Well, I mean, it's not likely that anyone watching this is unfamiliar with the story, but you never know. So just in case, it can be summarized, if you haven't read Philip K. Dick's novel, as so. Harrison Ford plays not a cop, but an assassin for hire, known as a Blade Runner, which the name makes absolutely no sense. Of course, the title makes no sense. And to me, you probably have some insight into.
They got
why
it from a
chose that.
script that someone else wrote, and it's someone that we know, and they were like, oh, because in the novel he's just a bounty hunter.
He's just a
and
bounty
I think
hunter. Exactly.
And I think they're just, so they were like, oh, Blade Runner,
And
that
his
sounds
wife-
cool.
and his wife,
Iran.
whose name is Iran, interestingly enough. Anyway, his wife hates him for it, and has to use an electronic based mood stabilizer to sort of like actually even stay with her husband and continue to live in that world. But yes, Harrison Ford's character Deckard is a bounty hunter, Blade Runner, and his job basically is to hunt and kill replicants who are synthetic beings. They are not electronic. They're not robots in the sense that one might think. They are. It's never quite clear if they're vat grown or how they're actually brought together. I think, but they are essentially human beings who have been created through technological means. But they're human beings, and they have a limited lifespan. And Rutger Hauer plays Roy Batty, who is a military replicant who has broken free from the colonies. In this world, humanity, at least a portion of humanity, has moved to what they call off-world colonies. It's never clear as to where those colonies are, because I'm thinking, well, where in our solar system? But it doesn't matter. They're no longer on the dying Earth. And Roy Batty leads a small group of replicants, some of whom are military, some are not, who are on Earth. And Batty's mission is to go to the founder and head of the corporation, the Tyrell Corporation, and find out how this 4 or maybe 5 year lifespan that they have, these replicants have, which is a failsafe to make sure they can't, live, and because they are physically superior and in many ways mentally superior to human beings, that their lifespan can be increased to whatever extent, perhaps even to a normal human lifespan. And so the story unfolds basically of Deckard and killing a few replicants on his way to Batty. But when he encounters Batty, things go wrong, because Roy Batty is not only is he physically strong, but he's a tactician in his thinking. So he's basically tracking Deckard's character as Deckard's trying to track him. And one of the interesting things about the film is that Deckard's basically a sweaty idiot from my perspective most of the time, but Batty is basically the living embodiment of Sun Tzu. So he's just sort of like moving through this world very, very intelligently and very deliberately to get to his target. And at the end of the film, after some twists and turns, Deckard, played by Harrison Ford, is essentially defeated by Batty, but Batty saves his life in an act of kindness, and that's often interpreted, and I often interpret it this way too, as him showing that he's more human than the supposed humans who are hunting him. because you're trying to kill me. I'm about to die because his lifespan, his program lifespan, is about to come to an end. But my last act will not be vengeance or spitting on you or letting you die. My last act will be to save you. Maybe you'll learn something. And then, of course, Batty dies, and Deckard goes on. And in one version of the film, I think he is by himself. Another version, he goes off with Sean Young, who's also a replicant. And they're driving around. Interestingly, they're driving in a beautiful countryside location, which completely contradicts everything else the film was showing. Like, why is Los Angeles so completely wrecked? And you just drive a half hour and you're in, I don't know.
The corporations haven't been there yet.
Right. I guess they haven't expanded, but somehow nature just contains everything over Los Angeles. It's very strange, and also shows that and I don't know if that's in the director's cut, or if that, I think that was, or in the original.
So I can share some of the different like versions and production and history around that a little bit. So couple things. So in making this film, neither Ridley Scott nor Peoples, right, who is the subsequent who takes over the script from Fancher, had ever read Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep?
Of course not.
No. And when Peoples took over, Ridley Scott told him not to read it.
Oh.
Because he said Fancher already read it, who had written the script that he was going to work from. So you don't need to. And to this day, or at least as of 2020, Peoples still says he has never read the book, which I just want to say how anti-intellectual and ridiculous that is. It's a 210-page book. It's not like it's all 3 volumes of Capital, right? It's not. We're not asking for a mammoth intellectual undertaking for you to read a book that you could probably read over like, a week leisurely and finish, right?
And it's a brisk, engaging read, so it's not even a slog, so
totally.
Yeah.
I read it in 3 days.
Yeah. So, and I don't know if Scott ever has read it, but I know that he didn't read it before the film came out for sure. So I do think that that's important and explains some of the significant differences between the film and the book. One of which you brought up, Dwayne, is the mood organ, which is significant in terms of their moods. They can program the type of like mood and day that they're like their own psychology, essentially. And Iran, his wife.
The book begins with it. It's great.
Yeah. She hates him because he's a cop, right? And because he kills people, even though she knows that they're androids and not, real humans, whatever. But she still holds this against him as like a moral failing. She also, interestingly, programs herself into like despair because she wants to kind of feel, I think, what's really going on, because they're always under this artificial, it's basically like taking drugs constantly. They're always under this artificial like happiness or like productive, like, I'm ready to go to work and do a good job at my job kind of shit. Like,
can I intervene real quick?
Yep.
And that's a big theme with Philip K. Dick. A lot of his things are about how labor in this kind of expanded world, he wouldn't use capital as like a phrase. He's not a Marxist in this way, but he's thinking about kind of imperialism or the kind of like expansion of empires. I would say he probably would be a bit more interested in that kind of thinking. And he's really interested in people having to go like terraform colonies, right? So you go, one that you could reference immediately is Total Recall, right?
Mhm.
The idea that people will have to go there. So they have in Palmer Eldritch, they don't have the mood board. They have this thing called, I think it's called Soma or something. That's not Soma.
Yeah.
That's a different thing.
So
But
something
it's
like that, though.
something like that, where you take it and you transfer into this idealistic character called Perky Pat and this other thing. So you leave your body and you become a doll, right? So he's constantly, how do workers cope with terrible conditions? And corporations are making these kind of things, and they of course take that out in Ridley Scott's thing. But go ahead, Jay.
So another important aspect that's left out of the movie, which actually would check, I think, some boxes for you, M2May, in terms of liking it more, is Mercerism. So there's a religion within the book, and that religion is proved to be fake, right? It is proved to be something to generate a kind of shared projects of humanity, empathy within the humans, but
It's
of
an
course it
actor's
doesn't.
demo reel.
What's that?
It's an actor's demo reel. Is when you discover his tapes.
Yeah.
They're actually
Yeah.
the demo reel of an actor.
Yeah. Very, I mean, very
It's
funny
amazing.
that way, you know.
Yeah, it's and funny, yes.
Yeah, and so I think, you know, for people who are, you know, of the atheist, you know, persuasion, right? It contains a real critique of religion and the purpose of religion for. Go ahead.
But I'll add something. What Dick does do that I think is interesting, to not make himself a kind of finger pointy atheist, is that Deckard, he merges with Mercer at a point, right? So there comes this kind of thought that, yes, religions are maybe man or idealist made, but he does acknowledge that there is a function that can happen within society that actually can help us grow to an empathetic position. So that's where I always thought he's being interesting, he's being provocative in that way, and I've always quite liked that.
Yeah, for sure. And there's a whole, I mean, part of this mood organ actually is supposed to be to facilitate Mercerism, is supposed to facilitate this fusing into this collective consciousness or humanity and empathy. And so all that to say is just that there are some really interesting aspects of the novel in terms of critique and stuff that it interrogates and questions it raises and goes into and explores that just are totally absent within the film.
Yeah, I mean, like, there's a light reference in the film to the fact that the animals, most animals are dead, have died in this world, and so it's been necessary to create synthetics. And because as you recall, what is an electric sheep, right? Deckard has a prized possession, which is on the roof of the building that he lives in the novel, not in the movie, because we can't imagine Harrison Ford, you know, going to the roof of his building, petting his sheep. And you know, I guess he wouldn't be a tough guy if he did that. But in the novel, Deckard, you know, goes to the roof, and and then he has conversations with his neighbor. And if you have an actual living animal, that is to say, a natural animal, I should say, this is a status symbol, because there are so few. No one has dogs or cats or rabbits or anything. They've died out. And I guess if this knowledge was available at the time, you would also have said that the bees were gone. You know, so that this is what you get when there's not even any indication of insects, right? So, so the world is indeed, you know, dying. And in 2049, I think that that's carried forward quite dramatically in the sequel. You know, the idea that it's almost done. The cake is almost completely baked. But anyway, to your point, Jay, Dick really does explore. He isn't just write a world. He says, well, what are the implications of this world? What does it do to your psyche, you know, to not have a pet or to not know of any animals? What's happening with children? You know, all sorts of things. This is why you need a mood organ. This is why you need a device to keep you from committing suicide or being a homicidal maniac, right? And to continue to be a worker. From the first moment I read that, I recognized, yes, this is what, and as you say, Dick was not a Marxist, but but he certainly heavily critiqued the world that he was living in. Right? I mean, this is one thing that is undeniable, that Dick did not look around or look at the window and go, "Oh, this is fine." Quite the opposite.
No. No, not at all. And I mean, one of the elements too we've referenced vaguely, but depopulation, which does show up in both the film and in the book. In the book, it's explained a little bit more, but outer colonies. There is actually a reference in the book that a lot of people have moved to Mars, but basically the building that they're in the book is basically empty other than them and maybe a couple other families. And this is one of the things that the wife references in the book, right? Is like, if I just turn the TV off, all I hear is like the silence of this building, basically. Which is there's also a really interesting piece too, because I just think it's fascinating, the book being written in 1968 and Dick already having this like real, like being able to elaborate this critique of where entertainment already kind of was, but certainly was going, of just this kind of mood altering device, right? That we just, delve into, right? In order to kind of deal or not have to feel the real world, right?
I think we all need to reread Marshall McLuhan with new eyes, because McLuhan has gotten a bad rap. And I think people have only taken a surface look, or as a consequence of bad teaching in undergrad and graduate school about McLuhan, or readings of McLuhan's work that are cowardly. McLuhan was tackling all of these things, right? All of them. And I'm not saying he's perfect. None of us is. But he certainly, he wasn't just some grumpy guy going, "Oh, television." He was actually analyzing its impact and its effect upon how we think in a way that should be, for people who read McLuhan's work, would be reminiscent of recent scholarship and recent analysis about the impact of so-called AI usage on how we think. If McLuhan were alive today, I'm sure he would be all over like ChatGPT and all of that.
Trying to think, you have other things, Jay, about the making or the stuff
just
like that?
just couple. Yeah. So like there are probably 5 cuts of the film. So there's the original cut, right? Which is, you could still watch it. It's the theatrical release. It's just sort of
5, I
Blade
didn't know
Runner.
that.
Yeah.
Jesus.
So then there was an international cut, which is slightly different. But I don't know exactly what those differences are fully. One of the things that characterizes the original cut is also Scott and people, I think, well, Scott for sure. I can't, maybe it was the producer, somebody else. Scott and somebody else were fired from the film before it was released because it went way over budget. And they were like, "Fuck you guys, you're out of here." They did end up reconciling to some degree and bringing Scott back into the fold for its release, but he did not get any say, which I mean, a lot of times directors don't, right? But he didn't get say in what the final movie looked like, right? Or how the final editing and cut was made, right? So that's the thing. The piece you reference about the ending of them riding through the redwood forest or whatever, which, and it being like, Scott did not want that, and I don't think Harrison Ford did either. Ford and another thing to just reference is that Ford and Scott did not like each other at all, and Ford hated the fact that Scott just kind of wanted to tell Ford what to do. Ford had worked with a number of directors, but particularly like Spielberg and Lucas, who were more open to him, like exploring what his character, his role and what he should be, and having some input there. And Scott was not interested in that stuff at all. So they didn't like each other. There was, so the international version, then there's a version that gets found by somebody who's digging around in, I can't remember the exact context, but somebody works for one of the studios, basically finds it, and it does not have the voiceover, right? So this was one of the things is, I think both Scott and Ford were against the voiceover, but the voiceover got added in after it was tested with audiences, and audiences hated it initially. They thought this is terrible. And so then they added in the voiceover. my thought on the voiceover in the film is that I actually think if somebody were to try to be more true to the book, voiceover would be quite important because the book has a lot of kind of interiority to it. But I don't think the voiceover, as they put it in the original film, does anything at all. It's like explaining what he's doing, and just like it actually, I think, makes it worse. So starting with the director's cut, they take out the voiceover, but the original director's cut is not a director's cut. So that's another thing that's important to say. Ridley Scott really didn't have anything to do with the director's cut. He might have shared a little bit of notes, but it's done by somebody else, and they do take out the voiceover. I think they take the ending out, but they didn't follow all of his notes. So Ridley Scott did not like sign off on that as an actual director's cut. And he was working on something else at the time. I don't remember what it was. But then the final cut, which is now the versions that you can find, basically, because they've buried some of these other ones in between, were the original one and the final cut. And the final cut is Ridley Scott's director's cut. And it comes out in 2007. So there's a few things that they did that I think are also a little bit questionable, of like reshooting actually a little bit. And because there are scenes like in the original where you have a man playing a woman in certain points. And like there's also Daryl Hannah's character when she runs through the glass and everything like that. There's a totally different actress that did those scenes, and it's very obvious within the original. So there's just some things that they cleaned up in terms of those scenes, took the voiceover out, got rid of the ending. Getting rid of the ending, I think, is probably the most important thing, because the ending sucks. Like him going off into the, on his car with Rachel, right? The android. It's also just an important thing to say is that his wife is removed from the movie entirely.
That's right.
Which changes a whole lot in terms of like how you read his moral decision making and his relationship with Rachel and all of that kind of stuff. So yeah, that's all I would add to just like the kind of making of the film.
Yeah, he's just a sweaty, lonely bastard who kills for a living, who forces himself at one point upon an android, because the way that they become intimate is doesn't sit well with me, and then who gets to drive off, at least in one version, off into a sunny day, like he's in a commercial for a Ford Taurus in 1985. It's like, what the hell?
Yeah. I mean, I guess we can probably get to the other big differences, because, one of the big things with the ending is the whole replicant question, which is not a question in the book at all. Actually, when it is a question, it's like for 30 seconds and then it's solved. Right. When Deckard has this thing where he realizes he is working amongst androids, and like, oh shit, what the hell is happening? Right. And he has to take the test, which actually we could jump into. That's like one of the very first things. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, probably could jump into the film and begin. I mean, the other thing, and then we can get to maybe the performers as we get into. We've talked about Ford. We'll get to like Rutger Hauer and other folks like that. So yeah, the film. Oh, the other person there is one thing which I always forget, and I remember this because Jay mentioned the budget issues with the film. So the film had a big financing gap at some point. The person they turned to is Run Shaw of the Shaw Brothers.
Oh, really?
Yeah, people don't know. It's in the opening credits. Many people don't see it. They turn to Run Shaw. People don't know who the Shaw Brothers are. We're talking about 36 Chambers, Return to the 36 Chambers, the great films. If you look at this little set right here that I'm pointing to, that's actually the Shaw Scope set. I have the third one somewhere else. I was watching it not recently, right? So Run Shaw gave them the closing money for the film. Yes, for real. Go look it up. You're like, for
You
real,
know what?
really?
He should have insisted that Wang Wei replace Harrison Ford.
Yes. You get some Gordon Liu in this joint. You know what I'm saying? Like, you just need one Gordon Liu scene in there, you know? But yeah, that is one little interesting aspect, because it was a historically fraught production. Didn't it made more than its budget, but definitely didn't make the triple. But it was become a cult film, and it's had a life of its own ever since. So it's probably done more for them prestige wise, and I'm sure they've made money in the other ways, from it since. So getting into the film, right? One of the things to kind of situate that I find you have like the opening kind of like credit point, or my credits like explanation, right? And they do a thing, of kind of like setting up everything, right? I don't know, do you have the words for that, Jay, or no?
I do. I have the whole script actually.
Cool.
So yeah, the opening is early in the 21st century, the Tyrell Corporation advanced robot evolution into the Nexus phase, a being virtually identical to a human known as a replicant. The Nexus 6 replicants were superior in strength and agility, and at least equal in intelligence to the genetic engineers who created them. Replicants were used off-world as slave labor in the hazardous exploration and colonization of other planets. After a bloody mutiny by a Nexus 6 combat team in an off-world colony, replicants were declared illegal on Earth under penalty of death. Special police squads, Blade Runner units, had orders to shoot to kill upon detection any trespassing replicant. This was not called execution, it was called retirement. And then it's Los Angeles, November 2019. Yeah.
So like the film does really exist in a kind of, device of like throwing you into a world, right? They give you a bunch of things that you're gonna have to kind of decipher. Maybe sound a little bit confusing. Like, what's a Nexus 6? I kind of get they're an android. There are these people. It does that, and it kind of gives you this in words, and then just immediately jumps to like Dwayne had said earlier. You get these kind of large, extreme wides of this world that looks very much not like something that we know, but something that we fear. Even if we didn't know we fear that particular visual, we will come to fear it. Gas, light, especially if it's like you said, it's called LA. And we all think of LA as, palm trees and Beverly Hills Cop. Well, that's a couple years later, but you know what I mean, right? By that time, LA is already seen as something that is, a beautiful place. I mean, the thing to kind of say completely is the colors of the film. We're talking about lots of black, lots of gold and orange and yellow, right? um and the kind of blending. If you get blue, it's of a faded tint, right? Kind of like, yeah, you see it actually in like behind here, so that would kind of be the blue in the Imperial 80s, where they'll use it for a sharp contrast, but usually it's very threatening, the blue, right? It's like almost like punching at you, right? So it's like, so they use it a lot for like the surveillance lights, because one of the big things you kind of feel in the film consistently is there is constant surveillance. They're always looking for things, so if you were to open your window, you're inviting yourself to a kind of surveyed existence, right? So when Deckard goes home, you're getting this kind of like surveillance vibe going in, right? And you get, and then you have Vangelis, and Vangelis, musician. He gets hired because of he wins part of an Oscar-winning film called Chariots of Fire. People, da, 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 that song, right? Right, and it's made by the same company. They pitched Vangelis to really. He was like, of course, and Vangelis, does the score, and he does this magnanimous, really large, sparse but deep synths, you know, because Vangelis is famous for that kind of like synths that sound like classical compositions, right? Everything is large. The soundtrack, I mean, a little side thing, the soundtrack becomes a bit of like a legend because you actually can't get it for I think about 10 years. Like yeah, like there was no like immediate soundtrack like produced of the film. You had to like wait like 10 years before. I think it wasn't until like the 90s that you could produce. So you're constantly just like, you know, getting pirated versions, you know, people just like taking it from the movie and putting it on tape and making their own Vangelis Blade Runner dubs and selling them out of their, you know, out of their cars or whatever, or at you know, conventions, right? Reflecting in the eye, right? And you get this kind of big intro. You see the big like what we learn to be like the corporate tower of the Tyrell Corporation. And I think this goes into what Ridley Scott's. I mean, there's a way you could see this movie as an extension of Alien in that way, right? Right, where you have Wayland, right? Is it called Wayland in one? I can't remember if it's or this called it is called so Wayland, Corp, right? And then you can see Tyrell as like a similar or a proto. I can't remember. I think Alien is after timeline wise. It's kind of a similar kind of vibe, right? And you basically get this long like 4 to 5 minute entrance into this big corporate area where then you're about to have like this, you know, this corporate meeting of sorts that kind of sets the movie off.
Yeah, exactly. And of course, I mean, I would say that as introductions to a film go, it's quite arresting. As I said, when I finally had a chance to see it in the theater, like on a big screen in a revival, you know, in the proper aspect ratio, it was a bit overwhelming, you know, like this field. And then, of course, when as you were reading, Jay, from the intro, it's like, you know, Los Angeles. What? That's not the LA that you see on TV. Where are the pretty ladies? Where are the palm trees? Sorry, buddy.
Just do a super cut with Eddie Murphy driving into Beverly Hills.
And he does that goofy laugh. And then he gets blasted by a Blade Runner. You must be a replicant. No one's that goofy in this world. Yeah, and also note the talking about the Orientalism that's embedded within this film, and it operates on multiple layers because what does the Tyrell Corporation has almost an Incan style pyramid, right? And then that shot that you were just showing, Jay, it's as if you're the interior shot looking from Tyrell's office, I suppose it is, or his throne room. It's another way of thinking of it. It's like he's the pharaoh. Like he's not the CEO of a corporation. Yeah. I mean, this is a shot that you would expect, at least in your imagined version of what I don't know, Ra would see looking out upon his kingdom. So this is not merely a corporation. It's a form of power that that's unknown to us. I mean, corporates aspire to that, but, you know, but they're too sweaty and sloppy to actually achieve it. But, you know, in the film, they have achieved it. And, you know, I think that if Musk had his druthers, had his way, this is how he would be, like in some gigantic ziggurat, observing we mere mortals.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And I actually, as I was watching it, my favorite scene, I'll jump ahead to it, is when Rutger Hauer's character just crushes the skull of the Elon Musk and squeezes it.
Yeah, and he's trying to take advantage of him sexually. This is also interesting. It's like, oh, you know, you're a hot. I created you. You're a hot dude. I'm going to make out with you. Actually, no, you're not. This is going to end rather differently but also the arrogance, because here the Tyrell Corporation and Tyrell himself, you know, has overseen the creation of these beings who I guess you could say are cousins in a way, right? synthetic though they may be, and they have all these capabilities, and you're terrified of them, but you also are so arrogant that you feel that when they're in your presence, that you are safe. You can simply order them around. And Batty's character, played by Rutger Hauer, is saying no, and he says no, and he knows he's going to die for it. I mean, he's going to die anyway, so he has nothing to lose. He's going to die because of his limited time span, and also because he's being chased by a Blade Runner. And although he is indeed, as I said, better than the Blade Runner in every sense, and including morally, it's only a matter of time before he would be overwhelmed. I mean, he's not an idiot, because he's on enemy territory. He's on Earth, and so there's always more guns, right? But he's in Tyrell's presence, and he does precisely what Tyrell deserves, and it is a very satisfying moment, even though it solves nothing because the structure is still in place.
So this is where the film this I'm glad we're doing this, because this is where the film, I think, has a two-sided quality that I think is pernicious when it comes to kind of like larger ideology. One is the thing that we know about films like Blade Runner are people like Musk love these movies.
Yes.
These films are huge there.
Yes.
They have a kind of sick fantasy that they could create a baddie that one day would kill them. That would actually, for them, be a success. That would mean they achieved something that is godlike. And I think there's a way it kind of confirms. The other end, and this is the one that I've always struggled with too, is politically, and I think, Jay, you brought it up before. No, it was or Dwayne, I remember you both brought it up, is the elimination of the state. And this idea that capitalism really wasn't an important thing. We basically had a stopgap between feudalisms. Right? Like we had a feudal period. We had this thing where people made a lot of commodities, and then now and then once they figured it out, we went into like a feudal kind of thing. Maybe this is where Yanis Varoufakis gets his techno feudalism thing from. Maybe I'm being spicy there, but
yeah.
or maybe I'm not.
You can be as spicy about that neo techno feudalism nonsense as you care to be. But you might be right. You might be right because, a misunderstanding. And the misunderstanding not only of academics like Varoufakis, but as you say, of these would-be corporate overlords. I mean, they are overlords, but they don't, pardon me, understand that they are overlords with the assistance of a state. Right. And one of the things about our current moment that's fascinating to me is that, there are companies that are saying, oh, we'll manage the nuclear weapons for you. And nuclear weapons of course, corporations have always been involved in the production of nuclear weapons, but it's like Lockheed, for example, in systems. But it's always been understood to be the purview of a state. And I think that it's because even in the past, even some of the most rapacious capitalists understood that, well, I can't be trusted with anything really serious like that. Because I want to cut corners and then it won't function. Like if you want a nuclear missile that won't work after 5 years, give it to a corpo with no oversight, because they'll just say, well, we don't really have to make sure the missile works, do we? But let's just pocket the money. Tyrell is a corporation that exists in this world, in this essentially stateless world, in a form that it could not, because Tyrell would be overwhelmed by other rivals. Like, what's to stop other entities from just attacking Tyrell, or just producing, buying a bunch of replicants and say, okay, storm the Tyrell building, kill him? Like, there's no overarching. I mean, so the political economy, the understanding of political economy in the movie is very primitive, and that reflects not only Hollywood in general, but, as you were saying, Mtume, the fact that Ridley Scott has no understanding of these things as well, and that Philip K. Dick, to a much greater extent, even though he, as we say, he didn't embrace or espouse Marxist political economy, at least he was looking at systems. Or at least he was looking and saying, okay, well, how does this terrible thing work, right? And what would an ordinary person's place be in that terrible system? And these are questions that these people who are obsessed with being gods never ask themselves.
Yeah, no, it's a great point, and it's an important distinction between the novel and the movie. So Terrell Corporation, yeah, there's nothing shown above it in the film. It is portrayed, you know, almost godlike, right? The pyramid, just everything that and the Rosen, it's called the Rosen Association in the book, and it's not in LA. It's actually in Seattle. But there's a whole thing where uh, Deckard goes to them in the book and is like, basically like, why do you create these things this way, kind of thing, And they're like, well, because the state told us this is what they needed in order to do their colonization of these, outer places, right? So it's like, yeah, it's a different look. I mean, I will say that, this this question of unrivaled monopoly capitalism coming to this place where it is, completely above and outside the bounds and kind of dictates what the state does. I mean, you know, that's like, yeah, Alex Karp, Elon Musk, like these people, imagine using the state as their piggy, and in many cases do, right? Use the state as their piggy bank to do
As their
what they
piggy
want
bank.
to do.
As their piggy
Yeah.
bank. Yes, exactly.
But there's
Yeah.
at least a
Because
state
I
in
mean,
that representation, whereas it's really not
precisely.
here other than the police,
Well, because they because even a maniac like Carp understands that. Well, okay, let's say I being Carp, let's say I make all these, and now imagine me just wearing a wild wig and gesticulating crazily. Um, I make these robots. Yeah, well, I'm not going to sell, killer robots to, grandma and the people down the way. I need someone who has super deep pockets, and that's only a state, right? Who has super deep pockets, and the desire or the objectives, of using, these weapon systems would be like Lockheed saying, "Hey, you know what? Would you like an F-35?" But what the movie is portraying is a world in which, like, who's buying these replicants, for example? Like, it's um, in the movie, it's not quite clear. Okay, the replicants are doing things, and they're doing things, but who's paying for it? How are they paying for it? And I'm not saying that. And listen, I'm not saying that. Well, what I want in a movie is a version of an economics lecture. That's not what I'm saying. But there are ways, as we've all seen movies in which a good screenplay can like insert these kinds of ideas and things in a way that's streamlined into the story, and you have some understanding that the filmmaker and the screenwriter and others, that they're thinking about these kinds of things.
Yeah, I mean, and this is something that I think is really important in the project of like First Cinema, is to either obfuscate or completely eliminate political economy as something that could actually be cinematically made. So they'll do that. You'll hear these excuses. Well, you can't really show that in a movie. That becomes the kind of like lazy excuse. And I'm like, well, that's just not really true, because you've seen plenty of films do that. And then but then they'll be the first people to like praise Wall Street, right? Oh, but Wall Street's great. And I'm like, well, then you're just contradicting yourself,
Or
right?
the Big Short, which is an excellent example of trying to, within the limits of, of the filmmaking and the ideology of the people who make the film, but within those limits, that film is trying to show you structure. As I think I've mentioned before, I was consulting at a hedge fund, and I'm like, yeah, okay, you're doing a good job of telling this story. You're leaving a lot of things out, of course, because you're pro capital, but you are telling you're telling a lot of the story. So it is possible to tell these stories, as you say.
Yeah. So once you get into the corporation, I think we can start talking about the replicants. You get was it the Voight Kampf test? What is it? I think it's
Yes.
called, right? Am I saying it right?
Exactly. Yep.
You see someone you later discovered to be a replicant, He's called Kowalski, Leon Kowalski in the
Yes.
film, played by Breon
Yes.
James. People have seen him. What's interesting about his character in the book, kind of repurposed, is he's actually a Soviet in the book. And this is the other thing where how Dick does bring in the States is he's very clear to still that we still live in kind of nation. There are nationhoods or nations within the Dick framework. How he posits those nations within his books is a whole other debate. And I do think it's a debate that people need to have about his work. It's probably something that does trouble me about his work a lot of the times, how he positions those things. But it's taken out of this. Now the kind of replicants are there, they're a band of outsiders. Let's just say like that, right? To use a Godard reference, right? And the test. So this is interesting to me, and I'm curious people's thoughts, because this is also borrowed from the book, but they don't use it in the same way the book does. The test is about the responses one has to particular questions that are supposed to indicate human empathy, right? Or a particular kind of, well, I would say empathy. Let's just say it that, through various responses, right? And someone administering the test who's human is supposed to be able to tell whether or not someone is a replicant. And of course, in the middle of the test, after a particular question, you get, Leon Kowalski shoots the guy, Holder, I believe is his name, Holden, maybe. And then your movie kicks off, right? There, and this is where it becomes Hollywood. You get this, it's what's in about Blade Runner. Like, you get the kind of slow Vangelis, right, and then you get in the room, and then you get a gunshot. And that's what's always kind of annoyed me about the movie. Like, I've always been like, oh, okay, cool, yeah, I'm down to go slow. Gunshot, and I'm like, oh wow, okay, wow, yeah, you that's a change.
Yeah, you got me set up for a meditation of a sort. Oh, here we are, right back to the gunshot.
We're still in Hollywood, y'all.
Meditation over.
Don't forget.
Meditation over. Namaste, mofo. Yeah. I wanted to read something. Before we proceed, I want to read something that Alchemy wrote to me when he and those who know Saturdays with Renee and Dialectical House Party, I'm sure hopefully everyone knows Alchemy, and if you don't, you should. Alchemy and I were chatting about this movie, and he mentioned, of course, the Japanophobia that was taking shape at the time the movie was released. And he wrote the following because, as we know, Blade Runner became the visual touchstone for the cyberpunk genre that was taking shape. There you go, with, drink Coke, and of course it's a Japanese woman, or at least a woman dressed up as if she's Japanese in geisha garb. So here's what Alchemy wrote. Cyberpunk as a genre was actually in part representative in a lot of themes of basically Japanophobia, reflective of the deeper contradictions of the USA capitalist society's fears that we would live in a future dominated by Japanese capitalism and Japanese globalist culture, partially due to the waning American hegemony. And Japan, one of the previously sublate fascist centers of imperialism prior to World War II, receiving a massive spike in the growth of its own capitalism, even threatening to overtake the empire's bounds, or irony abounds rather, which is at least thematically the partial origins for some of the both Orientalism and Japanophobia that is characteristic of the genre. And we definitely see this in Blade Runner with the so-called city speak that Angelinos of this time, and this is mentioned in the movie, not in the book, but there's lots of quote unquote Asian characters doing things, and they're supposed to be speaking kind of a mixture of Spanish and it's never quite clear like which, is it Japanese, Chinese, Korean, Khmer, like what Hmong, what are they speaking? What is the Asian root of the Asian portion of the polyglot language? But Mtumi, you mentioned the nihilists, and I wanted to also mention the cyberpunks who are of, I guess, and they're in the same camp of people who thought, oh, it's so cool. This would be such a cool world because I get, I don't know, to wear an eye patch and have a blaster, whatever their dreams are, have a robot arm, whatever their dreams are. Um, but as Alchemy is saying here, that is indeed based upon phobias and fears of being overtaken, and that's and this movie I consider to be like a jumping off point for a lot of that.
Yeah, and I think it's important to also situate like visually 100%, and you can see it within the film, and there's not much explication of any of it within the film at all. Um, Within Dick's work, and I don't think it really comes up in Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, but it's certainly in The Man in the High Castle, right? Like this idea where we've talked already about his fear of fascism and his belief of fascism. He reads this line, and I'm going to paraphrase it because I don't have it, like I could find it, but basically within like some Nazi archives, essentially, of somebody who's like running a camp or something like that, and saying like the screams of children keep us up at night, right? And it's like that, like, really startles him, right, in terms of a kind of lack of human empathy, of sort of how could you be so selfish that like you're just upset that you're losing sleep because children, like, you're not upset that the children are screaming in the camp that you put them in. You're upset that like that screaming is disrupting your sleep, right? um and anyway, so a lot of his work deals with fascism. Man in the High Castle deals with what if the Allies had lost World War II and Japan had colonized half of the United States and Nazi Germany had colonized the other half, right? And I do think that there's probably some residual visually within the film of that kind of, because I imagine Fancher with his original thing was a little bit more immersed in some of Dick's work. Um, but again, it's not dealt with in the film in any meaningful way because there's no Japanese government that's pointed to. There's no, none of that is the case. But you do have this weird Los Angeles that seems like it's like Hong Kong, right? Or something like that, right? Like, in,
Yes,
so yeah.
It also reads
exactly.
to me as a lazy, very European comment on immigration.
Hmm.
And you hear this, that we live in a Creole language world, but not, this is something you hear from like liberals, right? And um Los
Remember the
Angeles would
world.
be seen as this.
Remember the world music era in which we were
Yeah.
bombarded with this idea.
Mm-hmm.
Hmm.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. Graceland, things like that. Right. You're getting stuff like that type of idea. Right. And New York, LA are probably specific sites of that. So if you think of what they want to create as a dystopian Los Angeles, right, it would be one where even English as a dominant language, once you get to the kind of subaltern, would be lost. Right. Because one thing to point out, Edward James Olmos's character Gaff is completely made up. He's he has no reference in the book. This is an addition of the writers. I don't know who had it first. My guess is it was probably Peoples, right? But I'm actually not sure. Maybe if someone does know who brought that in, it would be really, really, really good to know, right? But that's an addition. Sorry, go ahead. Do you know actually,
No,
Jay?
no, but I wanted to add one more point, which, so if you have more to say on that, go ahead.
No,
No,
go ahead.
just that, Kowloon is, I think that's how you pronounce it, right? Is the walled city in Hong Kong in this period, and it was a major influence upon Ridley Scott and the concept artist Sid Mead. And they actually, I think the only reason they didn't film some of it there was probably that they couldn't afford it, but they were actually really interested in filming some of it. And so that's I'll pull up a picture of what Kowloon looked like in a few minutes so people can see. But that was kind of like what they were thinking. And I will say, to their credit on this point, I mean, we can talk about how critique that idea, right, of even doing that, right? But to their credit, they do so much work, and it actually was something that people who worked on the film were like, was excessive, totally, to like create these backdrops. They would film, they would have matte paintings, they had all of these models that they built out, right? They're all miniaturized. They would, you know, have them in black, but then like carve out little pieces of them and then have like a blue light coming in it. At one point, that pyramid thing actually melted because it caught fire or whatever from like what they had inside of it. So, and there were parts of it that people who visited the sets and stuff were like, this is ridiculous because a lot of this will never even make it onto screen. It will never even be seen within the visuals because it's so dense. But they did a lot of work around that to create this really immersive visual experience. Anyway.
But imagine, and let's compare and contrast the visualization that Scott oversaw, worked with others to create for Blade Runner with the um, albeit in an animated form, but for Ghost in the Shell, which is indeed set in Hong Kong, of a world that has suffered a great deal, but retains humanity. Like and also meditates on is, I think, in my opinion, more effective in a film form meditation on synthetic life and so forth. I think Ghost in the Shells is a masterpiece in my view, the original film, and a beautiful example of what Japanese animation was doing in the late 90s. But in any event, there's a moment in Ghost in the Shell in which Motoko, who's the lead character, and also the leader of a military or a paramilitary group, quasi police. There's a beautiful scene in Ghost in the Shell in which she's simply observing life pass by in Hong Kong, and a really quite gorgeous song is played in the background there, with a group of women, a vocal chorus of women, and sort of modernized kodo music, Japanese kodo music. And so here you have a super dense city, and but unlike the Western view, unlike the view that unlike the view that's portrayed in Blade Runner, in which that's a disaster, and you're dealing with all these different types of people, which is a very based upon Western fear. This is depicted as a city that continues to exist and grow and evolve in its own way.
Yeah, I mean, I love Ghost in the Shell. I agree at a very high level. But I won't go down that
No.
that rabbit hole right now.
That's a
whole
whole
other thing.
A whole other thing.
So the film, and some themes that kind of start throwing out here, we can start like tackling. So one of the things is, the concept of like the detective story that I find interesting, and how the film kind of leans itself. In the book, what's interesting, he's not as much a detective as he's a bounty hunter in the book. And I think that's
he's not really much of a detective in the movie, although he's supposed to be.
He's supposed
to be a terrible detective.
Because there is that he's retired, he's kind of out of it a little bit. In the book, we mentioned the animals thing. A lot of interpretations of the book is that his interest in the bounty hunting is actually he needs the capital to basically buy an animal for his wife. I mean, it's pretty much he needs to be able to do it. So it's a comment of him as a kind of laborer-ish kind of thing, and him needing to kind of buy, because the animals there are social capital. In a world of no animals, you can afford to buy an electric animal. That's a big deal. Right. And here he's slightly retired. He's reluctant. So when, he's fighting, Kowalski gets his ass whipped, they kind of really play with that kind of thing. But the detective element, the kind of like noirish detective, but like you said, he's not a very good one. in many an aspect, kind of becomes one of the driving kind of forces, this kind of like search. And I always have found it, this is where I think Scott and them are trying to be existential, right? Because in the search for the clues, he's asking himself key things about humanity. But what's interesting to me, the key things about humanity have to do with shit like, can I love an android? Right? Or like the question of what is life comes, can I basically like sleep with an android and feel okay about it? Right? Or and I'm sorry to kind of go to get, it's really kind of how it goes.
It's as basic as that. It's as basic as that.
Right. Or on the flip side, when we get to Rutger Hauer's character, is one of the big differences with the book and the film is in the book, there is a very clear thing that these androids don't have empathy. That's the thing that they actually take from them. It is a purposeful thing. In the film, it's a bit quasi. I don't quite know where they sit with it. It's like maybe they were trying to, but they really didn't because they really are alive. And that shows it becomes. I've been reading a lot of Lenin. I've been reading Materialism and Imperial criticism is like right behind me. And he in one of his critiques, I think it's of Bogdanov, where he critiques Bogdanov of being an agnostic. And I think it's great because Lenin's problem with agnosticism within a scientific framework is this idea that you don't really have an opinion, so you're so fucking chaotic, right? That like you'll make a thing and then you'll make a thing and you can't even, because you say, well, it could be, but we can never really prove it, right? You end up creating chaotic theory. And when I'm watching the film, and I'd be curious people's thoughts when I'm looking at the idea of the replicants through Rachel, through Pris, is that Daryl Hannah's character's name? Or is it Pris?
Yes.
Pris, right? Pris.
Yes.
Through Kowalski and through, Rutger Hauer, I'm seeing a kind of chaos of humanity that I think they kind of hide behind this idea that we don't really know what humanity is. We maybe know it through actions or doing, which we get at the end. With him saving Deckard, we know that he's human or a being because he had the capacity to basically not let him die and fall. And Rachel is proven to be human worthy because she can, get into a emotional relationship with.
Yes, it's ridiculous. I mean, I'll say this, and then I have to bid you gentlemen adieu. But Blade Runner. So we mentioned Ghost in the Shell and the effort made in that film to actually explore some of these themes, right? We mentioned the novel and the effort that Dick made in the novel to explore these themes. Blade Runner is what you get when Hollywood puts kind of a Potemkin village of serious theme exploration. That's really what it is. And then to me, I think you're really you said earlier that first cinema, right? It tricks you in this way because because you are encouraged to think that what's being presented is profound, when in fact it's all surface characteristic, and you're doing the work, which is fine. We should always be doing the mental work, but the work of art, so to speak. I mean, film, as we know, is art and commerce, right? But there are films that are works of art and commerce at the same time. It's possible if you have an actual vision. Maybe we could say that Ridley Scott and others of his type are, to Lenin's point, agnostics in the sense that they don't really take a stand, right? And not simply, and we all have to operate under capitalism, and we have there's compromises and so forth. But some people, they don't really have anything to compromise. They don't have a point of view, and so I now see Blade Runner, despite my admiration, as you mentioned, Jay, of its visual, of the work that went into it, and the moments like I'll never forget the opening moment of flying the spinner towards the Tyrell building through the field of gas flares. That's a brilliant moment, and it says so much. And it's a shame because that says so much, and then Scott did so very little with it ultimately. It's like you're given all the pieces to do something truly great. And even Evangelis's music, many things are there. Uh, but you don't do anything with it, just as, you know, Ridley Scott. And I think that, what is it? Oh my God, the famous Roman movie, the movie Gladiator. Gladiator, right? Yeah. I mean, Gladiator is another example of this. We're not going to go down that road, but you watch Gladiator and you think, I'm understanding ancient Rome. No, you're not. You're being fooled to think you're understanding. And all the pieces are in place. Everything is there. And it's a good show, but and that's fine. I'm not against entertainment, but Blade Runner has a pretension. It had pretensions to be something more, and that's why I'm harsher on it than I would be on, say, Gladiator, for that reason. But unfortunately, gentlemen, I have to step out. I have
No worries, man. Thank you.
another appointment.
Thank you so
Yeah.
much for joining
Thank
us,
you, my
Dwayne.
friend.
We'll
Yeah,
carry on some of the other themes, but really appreciate it, man.
Yeah, my pleasure, and I'll certainly watch where you guys go next with this.
Yeah, hit us in
All
the
right.
comments if there's any extra things in there for sure.
All right. All
Ciao,
right, man.
guys. Bye-bye.
Peace.
Thanks. Peace. So on the empathy thing, let's stay there for a second. So, because this is like the central theme of the movie, it's very important to the book. It's dealt with differently in both places. I think it's worth talking about a little bit of how it's dealt with in the two things and kind of what it means, the limitations of it. I think that, so obviously, as we talked about earlier, the Voight-Kampf test is a test to measure empathy, and it's a very weird test. Like they continuously put the androids in these situations where it's like, you're doing some really fucked up shit. Like, why are you doing that? Right? It's basically like you turn a turtle over and leave it to like roast in the sun. Why did you do that? And the guy's like, well, what do you mean? Like, so there's that. Obviously, there's this scene in which he does it with Rachel. And so Rachel, just to explain the scene, because it's, I think, one of the more, it's important. There's not a lot of scenes in the movie that are that important, honestly, I'll be honest. But Ford's character Deckard goes to Tyrell Corporation, and Tyrell is basically like challenging him. Like, I want to see a positive test before I give you a negative. So take Rachel, right? And so Deckard is supposed to believe that Rachel is a human, and that he's giving this test to a human. It takes him 100 questions, but he determines that she's not a human. And at that point, Tyrell, asks her to leave the room. And Deckard says, so she's an android, basically. And, Tyrell's like, well, but how many questions did it take? How many does it normally take, right? It usually takes like 20 to 30. It took 100 for him to figure it out with her, but he has figured it out. But she doesn't know, right? So this is part of the thing, is that she is special, right, in a certain way. In the book, interestingly, she and Pris are twins. They look identical. And it's a model of this android, right? So they all kind of look alike. That's the idea, is a kind of mass production of this stuff. They didn't do that in the movie. I don't really know why. Maybe they just wanted to cast Daryl Hannah in a role as well. But anyway, you have that. But the empathy point, so like the idea, right? And we have our version of this, and I forgot, somebody will say it in the chat. There's an AI test that's given that is more about cognition and something else. The Turing test, right? So that's like kind of what is used. The Voight-Kampf test is supposed to measure empathy, and so it's Philip K. Dick's point of view that what's supposed to make humans actually human is their capacity for empathy. The Nazi thing raises this profound question for him. because he sees them as inhuman, having lost their capacity for empathy. So the idea would be that androids also would not have this capacity, that they could reason to some extent, or that they could at least, they could have intelligence and so on, right? But they wouldn't have empathy. And in the book, the way he deals with this is to say that actually the big question that he has is, what about humans? Like, how do you deal with humans who don't have empathy? Which is a like a form of psychopathology, essentially. And so there's a recognition within the book that some humans don't have empathy, and that they would fail this test and be killed by the Blade Runners, because they wouldn't be able to tell the difference between a human without empathy and the android. And that is the kind of moral dilemma that is sort of driving the book. In the film, the way they deal with it, actually, I think, is to demonstrate that the androids do have a capacity for empathy, ultimately, that they, um, or that they're developing it. Like, because obviously, why does Rutger Hauer decide not to kill, or just let die? He doesn't even have to kill him. Deckard is going to fall off of a building and die at the end, and he reaches out and grabs him and saves him, and makes a point to do it with like basically his last living action. Also, Rachel ends up killing another android, both in the book and in the movie, actually, which is interesting. I'd have to go back into like sort of trying to understand that within the context of the book. But that raises a question, right? Like, why does she kill another android? At that point, she knows she's an android. Because she does eventually find that out through discussion with Deckard in the film, because he knows her memories that she's never told anybody, is basically how that's revealed. But, so those two instances of her killing an android that's going to hurt Deckard, who she's in love with, right? And um, Batty, is that his name? Roy Batty, the guy played by Rutger Hauer, saving Harrison Ford's character Deckard. These are these instances of actually the androids perhaps showing empathy and the humans being the less empathetic characters, right? Because Tyrell doesn't extend their lives when he probably does have the capacity to do it, because we find out that Rachel, although this is different on different cuts of the film. So in the original, at the end, it's revealed that Rachel can live past 4 years, whereas in the version that Ridley Scott wanted, which it becomes the final cut, I don't think that's ever said. And the last thing it leaves was sort of Edward James Olmos in Deckard's head saying she won't live forever, but neither will any of us, kind of thing. So I think that's it. My bigger problem with that is that it reads fascism just again as like this kind of psychopathology and this failure for empathy, which is where I was talking about the kind of Hannah Arendt logic that comes into both Philip K. Dick's work and this film. Whereas I would say that it is more, there is that, right? And I do think that the question, we can come back to this too, the androids are also slaves, and there is a whole discussion about slavery and colonialism within both the book and the film, and the kind of inability of humans to extend their empathy to the slaves or the colonized, right? In a certain extent, where the slave colonized is actually able to extend a version of empathy towards their colonizers, which is a whole other question of whether they should, right? Is another, question that raises.
Yeah, you see it. So in the film, you see about three. Well, you see 3 killings of replicants, right? You have the exotic dancer, you have Kowalski's, and you have Daryl Hannah's Chris's, right? I think there might be another one. I can't remember that. I think those definitely 3 of them, right? And if you see how they're visually handled when the exotic, I forget the exotic dancer's name's character in it, when she's killed, it's done in this like excessive slow motion. It's done in this drawn out way to make you kind of induce a questioning of, yes, we know that she's a replicant, but she's exuding everything we understand to be humanity, even the need to try to survive, right? The know that they understand threat, right? And they have a need to survive and a self-preservation. So when she's shot, and then she's shot in the back, that's the other thing. She's not like, it's not like she does try to take out Deckard early, but then she doesn't kill him. She doesn't stay there to like she runs away, right? And she's not in a gunfight with him. He's really in a gun chase, kind of trying to get her. And he shoots her through windows, and then you see her kind of flailing, and the bullets in her back, and you get all the really sad music. So it induces the audience an essential question, right? This idea of, oh my gosh, right? I'm watching a being die, right? Because it's done that. If she was just, popped off and just kind of like fell off on like the side, you would never have that question. So it's being induced in you. And then when Rachel kills Leon, while Leon is being so violent to Deckard, it actually then transfers to Rachel because she's having empathy because she's so distraught, right? She kills Deckard. She loves him. So her love could be a programming, but it is exuding what we all recognize to be a kind of an empathetic kind of disposition, right? And then same thing happens with Daryl Hannah's character when even though she's being, hyper violent, we're already kind of understanding this kind of need for self-preservation, right? And then I think also they kind of like blur a line with her of like showing that she can be, nice, but we're not meant to totally trust it. But then when you kind of put it with Tyrell and all that, realize that their creations are like done in a particular way that has kind of forced them into this position. And I have to say, I mean, what it does gets into, I've always found how European and liberal thought tries to think about enslavement, and they always do it in this displaced way. As I've gotten older, I've found a lot of troubles with it. This is of how they want to think about enslavement through things like androids or things that were not originally human. Because I think there's like a fundamental, I think, fucked up, to be perfectly honest with you, starting point is because Black people who were enslaved were always human. We were never not human, right? And we're not a creation, right? I remember. Do you remember, Jay, the Animatrix? Remember that? It was the animated movies that came out between The Matrix and The Matrix Reloaded. In one of them, they have a thing where they did the Million Android or Robot March. And I remember my homie saw it and he got pissed off and he was like, they're referencing Black people? We not androids. You know what I'm saying? What the fuck? That's not something that you should make a comparison, right? They want to fight for their rights. That's nothing that could actually compare. It's actually quite disrespectful. And I remember when he said that, I was like, yo, I was like, you absolutely right, bro. That's really fucked up. So doing that, so when Daryl Hannah gets killed, you see her kind of, you're meant to kind of like drown in a thing for her. And then of course you get it at the end because Rutger Hauer's being so violent, so hyper violent. But there's a way with Rutger Hauer's character, and I see this in the responses because one of the things to think about is how people identify with quote unquote villains or antagonists. Many people identify more with Rutger Hauer than they do with Deckard. He becomes a kind of identification character as well. I think for a certain kind of like outcast, kind of like, self-perception, right? And I think this also hits some danger points when you're trying to think about certain kind of, ideologies that have developed, but really in the last like 20, 30 years, where you see yourself as like a self-victim, right? It's all very chaotic. And this is where I find the film, its nihilism and lack of a real position on things, it just opens up cans of worms that are quite dangerous, right? And yeah, and then so then the empathy question, and it's funny, and I haven't fully read this. I mean, there's also a lot of, we don't have to go into it. Even the idea of empathy, there's a lot of contestation on it. Generally, liberalism loves this idea of empathy, and they love to attach the empathetic locus, right, as the real test of the kind of human thing. And I do think Dick was there. I do think he does have a little bit of a question of it in the book. I do think he questions, is it even, he definitely doesn't think it's innate. I think he thinks it's practiced. So where anti-empathy or no empathy would also be practiced, hence the Nazism. I do agree with you, Jay. There's a limitation though. It's a severe limitation, right? And this movie, I think, lives in that limitation in many a way.
Yeah. There's a lot to dig into. I mean, so one of the things in the book, right, is that Iran, his wife, her consumption is the driver. So there's a weird, there's this scene in the beginning, and she's like, basically like, "Fuck you, buddy, you're a cop. Keep your cop hands off of me," basically, right? And he's like, "I'm not a cop," and she's like, "Yeah, you're just a killer." Right. And he's like, "I don't kill humans." He's like, "Yeah, but you kill the Andes though." So there's an interesting level at which his wife, she's doing this extra work to become more in touch with her emotions. There's the interesting thing with the mood organ and the way the like, if you're constantly programming your emotions and your psychology, then are you actually like, what is it what does it mean to be empathetic within that kind of frame, right? But she recognizes that her husband does something that she sees as basically unethical. The flip that he throws at her, though, is a common phrase you hear from all kinds of horrible people all over the world, is like, "Well, you don't complain about that when you're spending my money to buy your consumer goods," basically, is what he says to her. I'm paraphrasing, of course, but that's the gist. And so it's an interesting kind of thing that Philip K. Dick opens up, right? Which is basically acknowledging that Deckard does ethically quite questionable violence work, right? At best. But that, and his wife essentially hates him for it, but also that she perhaps even, well, I wouldn't say more than him, because he's just as interested in like the electric sheep and possibly getting an animal. So they're both driven by this idea of like social capital and consumer goods. It's just that having an animal, or even having these android animals, is like kind of the thing that everybody wants. So that's an interesting driver in the film. The driver of Deckard's behavior is stupid. It's basically that he gets hauled in by Edward James Olmos' character Gaff and some other guy, and brought into an office,
Yeah.
and
Emmett
basically
Walsh. Yeah.
and basically told, "You have to do this." But it's not, and it's sort of the threat, like, he says something like, "If you're not with us, then you're nobody, or you're with them," kind of thing. So it's sort of like an implicit threat of violence or total loss of social standing, but it's not explained at all. There's no real, you don't have anything there other than a kind of implicit threat that he operates under. It's never, as far as I remember, maybe if I missed something in the movie, or maybe you remember, I don't remember any other point where there's like an explanation of why he does what he
No, it's a
does.
it's a trope. He doesn't have much direction in life, and the reluctant detective will kind of always kind of nestle himself back into the seat, right? If he sniffs a caper, right? And that's kind of the thing. Like he almost like it's Al Pacino's line in Godfather 3. They keep pulling me back in, type of thing. It's weak. I agree with you. It doesn't really have much, and that's what I was kind of getting to before I didn't really finish my thought when Dwayne was still here about the kind of detective thing. And it's a really weak detective movie in that kind of way. It doesn't. They're kind of trying to use it, and then then you add the femme fatale, which is really what Rachel ends up becoming. She ends up becoming basically a classic femme fatale. Should you trust her? Should you not? And through the idea of the android, so it doesn't really have a real development. They're doing what aesthetic films want to do, just kind of give you the painting of it, let you kind of dive in the kind of tonal atmosphere of it, but not really posit questions or make you wrestle them in any kind of substantive way.
Yeah, I do want to go back to for a second the question of whether Deckard is an android.
Oh, yes,
So,
please.
so first of all, let me just explain the basis of this. It's a commonly debated, like, sort of Reddit film thing. And so there is a scene when Rachel and Ford are together where you get this shot, which is very quick. It's like you blink and you miss it easily within the film, right? And so her eyes, right? And this is something that all of the androids within the film have, that when light shines off of their retinas, it reflects, right? And they had to use, I think what's important to say about this, right, is that they had to use a film technique, and maybe a little bit more, but basically like put some kind of light, there that would shine in, that would bounce off of, their retinas or their iris or whatever the hell that is, and give that look, right? And so they would do it. Now, there's a big debate about this. So Ridley Scott says yes. He says Deckard was supposed to be an android. I don't think that he said that at the time. I think he said that much later after this started,
It was
fan theory.
15 years later.
Yeah. Yeah, fan theory started to come out about this and people got excited about it, and he said yes. Harrison Ford has always said absolutely not. He is not supposed to be one. Certainly in the book, he is not one, right? And I don't, to me, I mean, look, I understand because he doesn't show really any empathy at all within the film at any point, why somebody could read that he's not, that he's in, but I think that more so is the point that Philip K. Dick was originally driving at, which also is picked up probably through the original script, that you are supposed to read him largely as unempathetic to sort of raise the question, right, about the inhumanity of colonization, slavery, this type of violence work, what humans' capacity is for a lack of empathy towards others. And then in the film in particular, to posit that the robots or the androids or the synthetic humans, that they actually might have a greater capacity, or potentially that the same capacity, they have that capacity for empathy. And so to kind of blur those lines, right, of like where does one sit or versus the other, I think that Ridley Scott is just full of shit when he says that that Deckard's character is supposed to be an android, because I just don't think that I think it just, he probably, it got posed to him as a fan theory and he probably thought, oh yeah, that's cool. I wish, and I think yes, but I
I'd
don't
have to
read it that way.
So Peoples has also chimed in on this. I'd have to track when he said it. He said he wanted it to be open, which is a thing they do in Hollywood. It's why I hate endings like what's the Christopher Nolan movie with Leonardo DiCaprio? with the spinning top shit at the end.
Inception. Yeah.
Like, fuck that.
Inception.
I hate, like, no, I hate that. I'm just going to be real with you. And I have my students, if any of them are watching, they know it's actually a running joke about me with my students. So y'all get a little bit with me, is that I hate open to interpretation. I can't stand it.
I want to say one quick thing on this. So I forgot to mention, Ford's contention, right, is that the light was there in the scene and it just glanced off of his iris by accident because the light was right there, is intended for her, right? And it just catches his eye just really quickly in the scene. So his contention is that there was never an intentionality around the actual shooting of that shot to make him an android, that basically this is all retconning by other folks involved in it. And I believe that, because if he was there on
part,
scene,
I totally believe
he would know whether they intended for him to have the light shine in his iris in that scene.
Right, because the whole other contestation is the whole origami thing, and then leaving of the origami piece at the end, that Gaff, and then you hear Gaff in his head, so that means that Gaff would know about his memories and his dreams, which is what you also get throughout the theme of the film, where that's how Rachel basically discovers that she's a replicant, is because Deckard knows her memories, right? And the film is also much more interested in memories than the book is. The book isn't really interested in memories, which I find interesting, and I think that's like the idea of memory being a site of like humanity. I think is like an interesting kind of like, or maybe they're like complicating it, saying it isn't, so forth and so on, because memories are things that we can also make up in our head, so forth and so on. But with that being said, yeah, I am not a fan of open to interpretation. Because it kind of goes back to what I said earlier. You are basically stepping into a position where you can accept whatever kind of comes down the pike. Usually for younger filmmakers, it also makes them not really engage with the material that they really want, and be kind of afraid to kind of make a statement. I think it's a very liberal thing where they teach young filmmakers to not be political, right? To not make hard statements, to not make declarations, right? Also, when you do an open interpretation, if something does come out that is, sexist, racist, so forth and so on, where you can go, well, I really wasn't going for that. If people want to read it that way, I'm sorry. It helps you kind of like jump away from responsibility. Now, to this film, the reason why I could see that as a thing, though I do agree with you. I think Ridley Scott is full of shit if he's being like, this will definitely, you're lying. You're absolutely lying, right? But yeah, I've never really liked the whole thing if he is a replicant. I actually think it's a worse movie. And the reason why I say that, and this is not a fidelity to the book as much as if you look at the book and what it's trying to kind of talk about, right? Where if you pretty much situate that Deckard is not a replicant, he is a human, right? And he is in this situation. By making him possibly a replicant, it then gets into a very kind of like soft tone discussion, honestly, about nothing. That's really very, it basically, and it's done in this way of like the Hollywood, but maybe he's a replicant. What the fuck is that? It's a parlor trick, right? That you could basically, and I know this is, well, no, they had sci-fi mags then that you could then write 80 articles in a sci-fi mag for the rest of the year. It's just cute shit. And now it's basically how you get blog posts about 18 reasons why Deckard isn't a replicant, 25 reasons why he is, right? It becomes BuzzFeed fucking culture, and it's all content schlock. And I just don't think I hate it, right? And if for him to, I mean, really should be either or. If he is also a replicant, and I'll finish here, then they also could have done more with that. because then the essential question of the film really changes, because then it really becomes about our own perceptions, right? Which is what I guess they're trying to kind of say. If he maybe is a replicant, then maybe we really are all human, or we're all android. It's just dumb. Like the more I try to say shit about it, the more my mouth doesn't want to speak.
So it's funny that you say this, right? Because this is one of the prototypical films for the Easter egg, right? And that is the Easter egg, right? Like this one quick shot where you see light shine into Harrison Ford's eyes. Is he a replicant, right? Like it is the whole, like, you could go, there's a Screen Rant article of 10 secret things in Blade Runner that you missed, and all this kind of shit, right? Which is very funny, especially given how chaotic the production of, how many cuts there were, who was in charge of the different cuts of the film, and all of this kind of stuff. But I agree with you particularly that it is a worse film, undeniably, from a philosophical point of view, for sure. Like, if he's supposed to be a replicant, because then it means nothing. Nothing in the film means anything if they're all replicants, right? Like, yeah. Anyway, what other parts do you want to talk about, or key themes you want to talk
There's
about?
a couple. Someone did say something in the chat, and I do want to bring it up. Is the fact that there are and Dwayne actually had in his notes. It's why we didn't get to it. The lack of Black people in the film, and that the replicants were all white. And I do think that is a really interesting thing. If we think about like the kind of like focus of the film, you have, the whites in all of the like structures of like power, right? And then you get like Edward James Olmos's character Gaff, who is supposed to be, and I hate that I'm using this word. It's like he's like a mutt. But that's kind of what the film makes him feel like, and I hate to use that by like using like the words, but like that's really what they wanted. Then the replicants, who are supposed to be closer to humanity, that we're going to get the judgment of humanity, comes through just white people. And I think that's another part of their displacement, where they're not really dealing with the realities and the horrors of westernization, of colonialism, of imperialism, of empire, of the things that they did, because they want to really enact a kind of question of empathy amongst white people, but that can only happen in a conversation amongst white people, which you could also give this critique to Philip K. Dick, because he was so over focused on Nazis, right? And maybe it is a holdover from Dick in that kind of way, where he's so focused on that. Granted, because like even like Man in the High Castle, he does bring up that like the Nazis like re-enslave Africa as like a part of it, but he doesn't really deal with it substantively in the book. The really bad TV show tried to do it, and it was really fucking. I actually stopped watching the show when they had Black people in the Thursdays. I was like, no, this ain't gonna happen. I'm done with the Man in the High Castle TV show where Black people got in it. It was so bad. But so there's that. But the other thing we have to also talk about, though, is the kind of Orientalist people in this, all the service workers, right? The people who serve you the food. I think that's also important, is kind of, because that feels more like an immigration thing. Like maybe we're supposed to guess that other parts of the world are irradiated and things like that, and America or wherever is a place that does have the ability, so they immigrate, right? But then, like we said earlier, this kind of like Orientalist look of these like peripheral people coming in, and they were just serve everyone, right? And they're clearly also like, it's funny, even though the replicants can live long, they're super strong, they're super intelligent, right? And they're super powerful. They are ecologically or evolutionary higher than those like peripheral people, than like these like Asian-y people. And then Black people don't exist. right? Um, um, b- um, and they're just the people in these peripheral areas are just there to be workers. They're just there. And someone made this comment, and I forgot where it was. It wasn't about this movie, or maybe yeah, I was reading. It was in Holly Garima's essay. I wish I had it in front of me. That he wrote in like the 80s. Holly Greenman, the great filmmaker, Ashes and Empress Sankofa. But he had this comment about what he would say third world peoples. He wrote in the 80s that third world peoples, when they're put into movies like this, they're there to reinforce that their highest potential is just to be in service of larger empire, right? And this movie does not break from that tradition, right? That they are just to be there. I mean, who's the one Asian character played by, I always forget that actor's name. Um, they come in because he's supposed to have information on how to help them become, live longer. So they go to him, right, as a person who knows stuff. And then, of course, they terrorize him and bring him to the brink of his life, right, as part of as part of their mission. And it's justified to a certain degree because they've been, wronged by Terrell and so forth and so on by their very nature.
Yeah, so the character's name is oh shoot, I have so many tabs open right now, folks. Apologies.
Same. I'm like, whoa.
Going back and forth. So it's Hannibal Chu is the name of the character, and he's played by James Hong.
James Hong, yeah.
And he makes their eyes. There's a continuity error here where it's supposed to be freezing, but there's water dripping from the ceiling. But anyway. But yeah, so one character I want to go. So first of all, I agree with all of that. I mean, I do think there's an interesting dynamic where these are the people who are left behind too, which is kind of question. I mean, there's also, I mean, in the book, it's post-nuclear Holocaust, right? So you could imagine that maybe all the black and brown people didn't survive the nuclear Holocaust or something like that, right? But also, I do think there's some weird aspects with the colonization narrative in the film, because even in the book to some extent, because why doesn't Terrell go to the colonies, right? If this is where all the upper class and the because the idea is that the people who are left are all of kind of a low social standing. So there's the whole question around Sebastian, which actually comes up in the film, JF Sebastian, and he's supposed to have this disorder essentially where he ages too fast, and his cellular structure, like I can't remember exactly what it's called in the film. There is actually a kind of a real world analog of this, but so his cells break down more quickly and he looks much older than he is, and he's not going to have a long lifespan either. And this actually becomes a connection for him with the replicants, that he feels empathy for them, and they sort of sell up to him that we're basically the same as you. We're in a similar position. They hang out with him, and there's some weird, probably sex robot stuff going on. There's also his own fascination with creating toys, which are like these like miniaturized synthetic sort of creature slash, you don't really know what they are, but he's somebody who is a part of the process for the Terrell Corporation of making the replicants. He's not the person who deals with the intelligence, or I think he says the biomechanical side of things. So he can't extend their lives, basically. They think he might be able to. So the first guy that they go to, like you said, is the Asian actor who makes the eyes, and he tells them to find Sebastian. Then because Sebastian is the one who can get them in to see Terrell because they're close enough. They play chess together. And so that's how they eventually get to Terrell. And then to Terrell, of course, they try to get him to extend their life. And he basically gives these, sci-fi scientific explanations of why he can't do it, which we're not, probably we don't believe, because Rachel has a longer lifespan. So in theory, it seems like it should be possible. but whatever. He gives explanations of why they can't, and eventually, not after too much time, our buddy Roy Batty crushes his skull and his eyes in quite satisfying fashion. But all of those scenes, I think with Sebastian, what's interesting is that question for him too of, and they actually pose it to him of like, why didn't you leave? Why didn't you go off world? And, or I can't remember if they pose it or if he offers it, but there's an explanation given that because of his disorder, he has to stay on Earth. But I always thought that was fascinating too, that Terrell doesn't leave, right? Like, why does he want to remain? I mean, I don't think the film satisfactorily answers that question, but
No, I mean, because like in Total Recall, I'm trying to remember if in the Cohagen, when he runs the colony, is it like that in the short story as well? I actually can't remember. And I can't remember from the book. Yeah, I just don't think these are questions, honestly, that they were asking, because I don't think they have a real substantive question about these things. I think they're all very quasi and chaotic. I think that they were probably more attracted to the idea of the feudal lord on Earth, and they felt that that would be a more kind of like frightening thought. Because, I mean, and if we think about the Americana, but then also I would think England, Ridley being British, this idea of going back to a kind of feudalism is like their greatest fear, right? Because they love liberal democracy so much. They're such a big fans of like the loss of liberal democracy. For them is like the greatest kind of fear. If we went back to feudalism, or maybe in a different scenario, to an authoritarian communism, right? Which they would see similar to a feudalism in a way, or like a fashion. It's just it's all very chaotic in that way. Yeah. I'm trying to
I do
think.
think the point you raised, right? So like I do understand all of the points why that are quite valid, right? As to why these like white, very European, frankly German looking especially with Rutger Hauer, right? Characters are to be the slave slash colonized and referred to directly of that. Like that's not subtle. And they're runaway slaves, right? They have broken free of the colony. They have killed the people on the whatever the transport vehicle or whatever, and escaped back to the United States to try to extend their lives, right? And so like at least narratively, all the issues that you raise, which are valid aside, I like that part of the movie. I like that it is enslaved people like returning, and that ultimately, I mean, even though unfortunately they all die, right? Which is that's certainly something. Um that and the only one that survives, and especially in the original cut, is Rachel, who is in this weird fucked up relationship with Harrison Ford. That's very rapey. And and they go off into the sunset together. But that he's at least able to come back and to kill Tyrell in the film too. I understand, just to say why audiences could say, yeah, Rutger Hauer is my guy in this movie,
Well, 100%, and I think that's like where it's like cool and dangerous. It gets into this. It helps induce, I think, a misunderstanding of just societal relationships, right? Like, there's a way you could like do the whole Tyrell thing as like you just see Tyrell's like an overbearing father, right? Um, and I do what you just brought up, and they actually said it. The reason why they partly hired Rutger Hauer was because of his Aryan look. So they were going for a kind of like Aryan thing. And if we think of the idea of the Aryan that even liberals love to kind of go into, is like highly developed, right? With strength and intelligence, but they're, you know, corrupted because of their racism or kind of supremacist kind of attitude, but there's still a fascination of it. And you see this with like Kubrick and Clockwork Orange, how much he loves his center character, which is what the original writer hates about the movie, right? When he cuts out the third part of the book. But with that being said, like, so if this is overbearing father thing and you have this kind of like relationship with it, you know, where it's like cool to watch him like take out, you know, his fucked up dad, there is this like, I think, you know, identification that many people who have these like libertarian kind of solo nihilistic positions think that, you know, my goal in life is to like destroy the fathers and become great because they've limited my existence. They've given me this inherent, you know, thing that, you know, can't happen. I think that's where a lot of people identify, because you have a lot of these people who grew up with certain kinds of positions, white people, certain types of a very male attitude of like self-disappointment. So like maybe they don't die, but you know, I'm a good looking white man or I'm not a good looking white man. And like, I can't get the job, the CEO job that I was promised. It's because of some kind of inherent negative taint that my father left me with, you know. And I noticed that like this is what people who love this movie do it. But like, and that's the thing. But it is exciting. Like you get to see him like take out the dude and, you know, get Terrell's shit and all that type of stuff. But how it kind of situates, I think, with audiences, it gets, you know, really funky. I do want to get to the one thing about the Rachel thing. And this is where, like, I always said, like I said, and Dwayne kind of brought it up, and we probably have brought it up, but I kind of just want to like say it with like a real button. It has just always been really bad to me. That's something that I think I noticed early on, right? The kind of cornering at the door. He forces her to say the things that he wants her to say, right?
He shoves her too, like he like
Shoves her, physically shoves her. And it's taking, which is a very common trope of how to convince a woman that she needs to get past her inhibitions, is to force her to say into like the kind of like some kind of like, I don't know, weird mental logic of like they'll break down if you kind of force them into it, right? Because what is the key part of it? That deep down inside, they really want it. What's funky about the Rachel thing, because that's already bad, this is how you prove that she's actually a real woman. Ew. In a way, right? In a weird kind of way, right? In a weird, you know, yeah.
Well, just a question that I have is like, is whether she's, I mean, because as people have said, like these are pleasure models, right? Like, so she's a sex robot to a certain extent, right? And so as he's giving her the commands, the question is she just repeating these things as like almost a part of her programming as well?
100%. I totally agree with that. But what I think is funky, if you take it through the through line of the movie, we're lent to accept that even though she is an android, if you have to attach her to the totality, she's a being that we are supposed to embrace as maybe not a human, but she's a woman, right? And the evidence that she's a woman that we could equivocate to the women that we know are through these very fucked up male perceptions of how we're supposed to understand women. So like I said, the basically the fact that he could do everything else he would do to a woman, which is also sexist and misogynist, he could do it to the android. So that's proof that she should be seen as the same kind of thing. And I'm like, y'all logics is fucked up, bro.
Very. And I mean, it's weird in the book too, but it's very different. So in the book, it's not, and you know, I skimmed, so I might have missed one scene or whatever, but like the scene I read within the book, the sex scene between the two of them, it is not at all that he forces himself upon her or like, it's not that at all. She's actually convincing him. And she does it in a way of like actually talking about something that, you know, we should be thinking of, you know, is like, she's basically like, don't think about it while you're doing it, because otherwise you'll be like, what the fuck am I doing? I'm fucking a robot. you know,
Right.
and like, and it adds a whole layer to it within the film, right? Because he's married too, right? So there's like all of this kind of stuff that's going on with their relationship in the book that at least is, yeah, it's all fucked up, but it's like psychologically complicated in a certain way, whereas none of that is in the film, right?
Yeah.
Because even the one with the voiceover, I don't think, I didn't watch that one most recently. I watched the final cut, but I don't think he ever actually like sort of talks about his own, interiority around this decision or this, scene. And so yeah, you just get this like basically it always reminds, there's the classic scene people reference as the Marlon Brando in Waterfront, right? Like the woman fighting it and being like no 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 yes, and this kind of awful rape culture, moment that deep down every woman, wants a man to overpower her into sex, which is like a horrible atrocious thing that
Yeah.
was so, I mean, it's not as common. It still happens in movies for sure, but in the 60s, 70s, 80s, like that theme was just
Even to
constant.
the
It was in
90s. Even to the
everything.
90s.
90s
Yeah.
too. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think it started getting questioned a little bit in the aughts, and then, now they have different misogynistic tropes to play with. But like, yeah, I mean, and like that's what, because in the book, and I am gonna reread the book at some point soon. I haven't done it in a while, but they are also really clear to show you that Rachel is all about her programming, that this is programming. So essentially, the question would be everything that she does has to do with her like essential programming, right? So if they were to do these things, it would be a program thing that comes from a higher up, right? This movie, they try to kind of, maybe it is programming, but the programming is, proof that, well, we're all programmed, right? Which is probably why it's my attractive for some people for Decker to be a replicant. We're all programmed, man, you know. It's just like, bro, but everything's programming, bro. And I'm just like, yo, man, I gotta stop with y'all. Like, I can't fuck with y'all at Blade Runner, man. Like, and I'm telling you, this is how a lot of the conversations have happened when I've been like, but nah, man, it brings it up because we're all really robots, man. I'm like, all right, I'm done. I'm out.
Yeah. Um I so other stuff. Well, there's the one thing to raise too, right, in the empathy note, right, is also how as Deckard takes out the various replicants from the crew, because
Mhm.
there's in the book there's 6, in the film there's 4. Um, that you also see that that Roy Batty's character, like it impacts him emotionally and kind of psychologically as well. He I mean, it's weird the way they show it in the film because he's like kissing dead bodies and this kind of stuff and getting their blood on him and that kind of sort of thing, making war paint out of the blood of Pris and this sort of stuff. But th- you know, Ford is quite ruthless in all of those interactions. It is very much him understanding that he is retiring, right? A replicant. He's doing his job. And there is that development through the film of Batty's character as, there's something more to him in terms of his, psychology as a replicant, I guess, for lack of a better term, his programming, his ability. And I mean, I wish actually Dwayne was here to talk about this part, and maybe we'll get him to do it on another, follow-up discussion, or, next time I have him on to talk about something. But this film is just very interesting in light of now we live in this world where we have these large language models, right? The so-called AI. And I think that films like this do a lot to the Musks and the Alex Karps and all of those people into like what becomes their desire or their what they're trying to market, what they're trying to replicate in terms of what AI is supposed to be, right? And this is where you get these things like, you know, these relationship bots and stuff like that, and
Yeah.
trying to create an AI interface that tells you, makes you feel good, tells you the kinds of things that you want to know, develop some kind of relationship with you. That a lot of this is based upon this kind of like sci-fi world, which is really, is in the case of this, is really fucked up, right? Because Philip K. Dick was like really trying to critique things, not to say like this is aspirational, but just sort
Yeah,
of like
this is
this is the
bad.
horrible way that things are gonna go in a certain way, or these are problems. Even using it sci-fi as a way to comment on the already existing society in 1968, not necessarily to say like, you know, this is what we're going to develop and do.
Yeah. Or like, not to bring his name in there, people like Nick Land, who's become the kind of right wing philosophical thing of that we need to encourage the kind of AI singularity because humans are fundamentally a dead end creature. So that our future actually is an artificial intelligence becoming. So he probably loves a baddie, and he would advocate for a baddie to figure out how to live long because he is the improved human. He has the better potential, and that we don't have potential, right? Which is really popular, and people like Land, people like Curtis Yarvin, Thiel, and all these guys. They dabble, at the very least, they dabble it. Some of them are like true believers to a lot of that really, really, really ugly, ugly, ugly shit.
Yeah, 100%. I don't think I have like a whole lot more that we haven't
Me
touched
neither.
on.
Yeah, and I definitely need to. It's a hot family day in the house. So yeah,
Right on. I mean, there is the crazy scene with Daryl Hannah when he
which
goes
one?
in, and he goes into Sebastian's apartment. This is like Deckard goes in, and she's hiding. She's like sort of like sitting as a mannequin. She has all this face paint on at this point. And
Yeah,
you know, she's surrounded, of course, by the toys, which are all. I mean, it's just Sebastian's
so
apartment is
weird.
a whole weird space. Um, and then like she does all this gymnastic stuff, and they did actually originally they had a woman gymnast do it, and I don't know if she couldn't do the things that they wanted or whatever, so they replaced her with a male gymnast. And so male gymnast actually does all that stuff in the film. And then,
Like
you know, of
Flashdance.
course, yeah.
It's I think is it Crazy Legs? I think it's actually is it Crazy Legs?
No way, are you serious?
It's one of them. It might be Crazy Legs in the
Oh my
yes.
god.
I double
Yeah,
check that with somebody for
we
me.
gotta do Flashdance soon.
Yes, we
But yeah,
do.
so then Daryl Hannah's like legs are like crushing Harrison Ford's skull basically, like between her thighs, and she's just like beating the shit out of him with her robot arms. Um, and then of course he gets free, and he just, you know, blasts her a bunch of times, and it's, you know, awfully brutal and sad. But that's just one of the weirdest, you know, scenes in the
Yeah.
whole movie to me.
Yeah.
It's like I actually kind of laugh when that scene comes around. 'Cause I'm like, what is
Yeah.
this?
Yeah. 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 No, it is all very weird. Like a lot of the construction of it, and I guess we'll talk about it another time, is like, or another movie, like is just these kind of like the X. Yeah, I'll leave. This might be like my last thing. Is I don't want to get it twisted. I have a lot of respect for the designers and the people who do these things, but the utility of it all, I find, end up being the equivalent of watching, like, when you Macy's on Christmas, when you see the really good displays, right? Except it's in a movie that's supposed to make you more emotional. It's just this effort to kind of do a big hyper beautification project. These are all highly skilled technicians with really, 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 really great smarts. I will never deny that. But the use of it is you know, but is very poor. But it also, what it does is it encourages like a kind of aesthetic interest in social issues, and that's the only way that we engage. And that's what Walter Benjamin called the brink of fascism, the aestheticization of politics. So
Yeah. One other just quick comment is also the sportsmanship discussion. So this is also
yeah,
one of the things is that
that's a funny
um
sequence. Yeah,
is that you know and I don't really know. I mean, this is not in the book at all, at least to my recollection of it. Because actually I think Deckard takes out Roy Batty quite quickly in the book.
well, Deckard's rough in the book. He knows how to get down.
Yeah. Um, and but Deckard has a really hard time taking out Roy Batty. I mean, he's not able to in the movie. Um, and Roy Batty dies of the end of his 4-year life or whatever, basically in the film. But there's the scene at the end, which is very prolonged, of like their clash. And I mean, Deckard is like very kind of clownish and, mocking and all of this. But he keeps pointing out to Deckard that he's being unsportsmanlike because he will try to like shoot him without him knowing that he's, there and all of this stuff. And Roy Batty is much more physically strong and as Dwayne mentioned earlier, a tactician, he's agile, all of these things. But he's willing to give head starts. He's willing to which is also a funny thing because it's like, I mean, there's a way you could read it as sort of like, well, the robot's playing with its food, or it's being actually kind of sadistic in a certain way of drawing this out and so on and so forth. But, I think there is an attempt to make a commentary there that Roy Batty is actually um, more human in a certain way because he's willing to be sportsmanlike, that this is also something that is somehow a human characteristic. And I don't know. I don't have a clear read on that within the film. I don't agree with that
No,
idea that there's some sort of, higher human component of sportsmanship. you
sounds like a
know,
holdover from The Duelists. Actually, have you ever seen that film?
I don't think so.
Yeah, I mean, it's about these two aristocratic men who basically they keep fighting each other every like 10 years. And a lot of the like conversation is like the ethics of battle. So it actually kind of sounds like a holdover of
Yeah.
that shit movie.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, it's very weird because like that, like where that always takes me in my mind is like the Hounds of Zaroff, right? Which is this idea of like um rich people who like have an island where they hunt people, right? Like Epstein shit, like honestly. Um and that they release people, right, and give them a head start, right, but then they hunt them down. And there's something
Surviving the
sportsmanlike that this
Game.
is like,
Remember that movie
yeah.
with
Well, that's
Ice-T?
based off of it. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's based off of it. That's like a film adaptation. Yeah. Um but yeah, I don't know. I mean, because it's what's funny is like that book and those movies are supposed to be a critique of how fucked up bourgeois kind of society is, that it actually lowers things to that level. And so it's really kind of like it's chaotic to put that into this, especially as Roy Batty in the end saves, Deckard's life.
Well, he is Sir Ridley Scott. So
I know. In everything I was reading, they kept doing that, and I was like, I'm not calling him sir. Like,
he
I
is
don't. I'm sorry. I don't respect the
Sir.
crown's ability to give people titles. I don't.
Sir.
I know we're gonna do a fuck the four thing tomorrow, but there are certain things that I'm glad we don't have to do in America, and one of them is like recognize the titles of like
Sir.
nobles and shit.
Yeah, I'm like, I ain't calling you sir, bro. That shit is not fucking happening. But I'm saying, but as a sir, I'm sure he probably saw some shit. He probably knows some things. What his pops is doing, uncles, grandfathers. He knows
I know.
weird ass shit.
All right, folks. We hope this was enjoyable. Thanks a lot to Dwayne Monroe for joining us. The chat was good today. I'm sorry I missed. There was a few things that got brought up, but this is I'll just raise this comment: a eugenicist nightmare being outperformed by one's own creation. I think that's that's a good, not super interesting to me, but it is interesting. This is the kind of thing that these not the comments interesting, but I'm saying like that as a plot is not really a plot that interests me that much. But I do agree that that is sort of what is done in the film to some degree, right? All right. We'll let y'all know
sometime next week. We're not doing it Monday, but then we're not doing it Monday. But we got to figure out next week.
Yeah, we have to figure out next week. But yeah, we'll get y'all posted on the next one. Have a good weekend, everybody.
Peace.